steel, firearms, and the Industrialists crossing into another world. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 651 Trap 2. But when Hershey saw a group of horsemen approaching his church in the distance, he assumed they were nobles or wealthy people strolling in the countryside. Only when they drew near did Hershey realize they were carrying the banners of Count Arda. He immediately ran out to greet them. Thank God, your arrival is a great joy to me. Reaching the group, he saw Paul Gleman on a white horse. I happen to be in Towder Village today, and remembering you are a friend here, I thought I'd drop by. Paul smiled, dismounting as he spoke. A friend? Hershey was stunned. He and Paul had only met once, at the church in Port Franklin. Quick, Paul grabbed his hand. Show me around your church, please follow me. Count Gleman. In the church courtyard, Adenal and Marianne continued discussing the details of their operation. Adenal, did you find out he'll be coming to this village? Yes, Lady Crimson Flame, but this village is quite large. How can you be sure Lord Gleman will come to this church? What if he just wanders around somewhere else and leaves? Would all your arrangements be wasted? Hairhead, then we'll have to find some excuse to lure him here. I wonder if our magic shows these past few days have worked. Of course, we have other methods, HMPH, I'm afraid none of them will work. Hearing this, Adenal rudely looked Marianne up and down. Marianne, if other methods don't work, don't we still have you, me? Oh, you are a very charming woman. Perhaps if you just go to the village and say a few words to Earl Gleman, he will willingly follow you to the church. Shut up. To Adenal's surprise, Marianne suddenly flew into a rage, her eyes filled with hatred. I'm so sorry, please forgive my extremely inappropriate joke. Lady Crimson Flame, seeing that Marianne was genuinely angry, Adenal immediately backed down. He dropped his jest, adopting a serious expression, and apologized sincerely. With action imminent, he couldn't afford any conflict. Marianne didn't pursue his offense further, but she also remained silent. Whoa! A quiet exclamation broke the silence from nearby Dessen. His eyesight was excellent. The church priest had gone out to speak with the newcomers, then led them this way. We're really lucky. Look, Count Gleman himself is coming this way. What? Adenal and Marianne were both startled. How did he get here so quickly? Adenal muttered to himself. Of course, having the target come to him naturally would certainly reduce a lot of trouble. Mariana, Durson and I will make some preparations. We can act at any time as soon as he enters the church grounds, but I will choose the most opportune moment. So you two must be vigilant at all times, keep an eye on the Earl's guards, and choose your targets. Durson also informed Nathan and Edward, and the two of them went to make preparations. Mariana's pupils widened as she watched the group of people slowly walking towards the church. Father, your church is truly unique. Paul looked up at the not-so-large church in front of him. He hadn't been able to see it clearly from a distance, but now that he was closer, he realized how simple it was. If it were when he had just inherited the lordship, it wouldn't be surprising, since the buildings throughout the Northwest Bay were all low and dilapidated back then. But things were different now, and it was rare that Father Hershey had refrained from renovating the church. Based on Paul's previous impression of him, it was probably because Hershey wasn't very good at making money. Hershey blushed slightly and said, Count Gleman, the Lord of Light never demands excessive material contributions from his servants. Paul chuckled, I hope your colleagues think the same way. The village church had a large courtyard enclosed by a fence, where many kinds of vegetables were grown. Reaching the courtyard gate, Paul saw quite a few people inside, especially many children. Oh, is there something going on today? Well, Count Gleman, Hershey briefly explained the magic show for the children. A magic show? I'd love to see it. Paul became interested. In every life, he loved magic. Entering the courtyard, the people inside looked at him with curiosity. The children didn't recognize Paul, treating him as just another ordinary visitor to the church. 3 adults caught Paul's attention. A tall, thin man with a thick mustache appeared to be a sailor. A young man of similar height, with a somewhat arrogant expression, was energetically performing magic for the children. There was also a tall woman with striking red hair, whose beauty gave Paul an indescribable feeling. From the first glance, her image seemed etched into Paul's mind. He walked towards the magic show, chatting with Father Hershey. "Father, you don't seem to be very well off. I've adopted a few orphans. I know there are many good people like you among the clergy in the Northwest Bay, and they're not doing so well. Well, we just need to serve the Lord wholeheartedly. Good people like you deserve some reward. So I plan to instruct the council to increase a special expenditure." "Oh, you're the Lord? That's your prerogative." Wait. Hershey perked up his ears, his eyes widening. He understood Paul's implication. The Lord was going to give money to poorer priests like himself. Hershey's mind began to race. Of course, he adhered to the rules and would never take money he shouldn't. But if he suddenly received a legitimate income, he wouldn't refuse. "Did I hear that right, Count Gleman?" "Of course." Paul nodded firmly. "How about calling it a social service allowance? In the future, those who receive this allowance may not be limited to your clergy, but anyone who contributes to society." Hershey was moved, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you, Count Gleman." He managed to utter a sentence after a long silence. The priest thought to himself, the Count must have been sent by the Lord of Light. As they talked, they arrived at the magic show area. Paul felt a little uncomfortable, because the red-haired lady was looking at him with an extremely complicated expression. Chapter 652 Backlash. Paul looked at the red-haired woman. She noticed him and seemed even more nervous. Paul guessed she was having some kind of acute illness. "Madam," Paul approached and called softly. The red-haired woman seemed startled. Paul asked, "Should I fetch a doctor for you?" "Oh, no, I'm just a little nervous seeing the local lord so closely." "Earl Giles, oh, you recognize me. I had the pleasure of seeing you from afar in Lake Town. It sounds like you're not from around here." "Yes, we are traveling performers." Paul smiled. "Have a pleasant journey in the Northwest Bay." He looked at the young man who had stopped performing as Paul approached. "Don't stop, the children are waiting." "I'm quite interested too." The young man grinned, showing none of the trepidation one would expect from an ordinary person seeing a nobleman. "Earl Gleman, I eagerly anticipate performing a magnificent magic show for the greatest lord in the land. But my teacher also yearns for this honor." The flattery was rather embarrassing. Paul asked, "Your teacher? Where is he?" "He is preparing. Please believe me, his magic will leave you with an unforgettable impression. You may wish to wait a little longer. Good dishes require careful preparation. I look forward to it." With that, Paul went to tour the church. Marianne sternly warned Nathan and Edward, "Listen, whoever I attack later, you must cooperate with me. Follow my instructions. What I do and what I ask you to do are all beyond question." The two had never been asked such a thing by Marianne before, but seeing her expression, they nodded nervously. "Great Lord Gleman, it is the greatest honor of my life to meet you here." Less than 10 minutes later, Adenal approached Paul, showering him with exaggerated flattery. Durson followed behind his mentor, a vague unease creeping into his heart. "Strange, we're so well prepared. Where does this unease come from? Is it the Lord's guards?" He glanced at the mortal guards. With Master Marianne, Nathan, and Edward present, they didn't seem like a threat. He also noticed the Crimson Witch's unusual expression. A conflicted look crossed her face. Could the unease be coming from her? Durson pondered, hoping nothing had gone wrong. In his mentor's plan, his role was to be a diverter. Contrary to his outward appearance, Durson's mentor, Adenal, was actually quite cautious. A powerful noble lord naturally had far more information in his head than an ordinary person. Adenal worried that after the spell was cast, his soul wouldn't be able to withstand the massive flow of information in the Count's mind. Therefore, he assigned his student to divert a portion, bearing a portion of the load, while also preventing any important information from being missed. Count Grayman stood ready, silently awaiting O'Donnell's performance, his guards surrounding him. Durson secretly lamented that most of them would likely perish in the church. O'Donnell began his act, manipulating a piece of silk in his hand, like any other magician's prop, a mere illusion to conceal his spellcasting. Durson silently assisted his mentor from a distance. Nathan's hands were tucked into his sleeves. He had prepared a spell, awaiting his mother's instruction. He had just noticed the hesitation and unease on his mother's face. She seemed to be struggling with an internal conflict, which filled Nathan with worry. He had never seen his mother like this before. Suddenly, Marianne's face hardened, and she slowly raised her arm. Was she about to attack? Nathan braced himself. However, What happened next astonished him. His mother pointed at O'Donnell. What was going on? Nathan's mind went blank. O'Donnell finished his final move and tossed the silk cloth into the air. Just as Paul expected a rabbit or something else to appear out of thin air, he suddenly felt himself enter a rather strange state. A sharp pain shot through his brain, causing a brief dizziness, but it subsided quickly. Paul swayed, then regained his footing. "Earl, are you feeling unwell?" the guard, Ogron, asked with concern. Nothing. I guess I haven't been sleeping well these past few days. I have a bit of a headache." Paul rubbed his temples vigorously. But there was one thing he didn't tell Ogron. Just a moment ago, countless fragments of memories flooded his mind, some from his past life, some from this one. It was truly strange. Ogron frowned. "Perhaps you should return to Lake Town immediately to rest." "Oh, please, my dear Ogron, at least let me finish watching this magic trick," Paul complained, then looked expectantly at the magician performing. "Sir, what's going on?" Paul was completely bewildered by the scene before him. The magician's eyes were wide open, staring blankly at him, his body frozen in a stiff pose. Is this part of the magic too?" Paul was confused. With a thud, the magician collapsed to the ground under Paul's gaze. Before Paul could react, he heard another thud, and the magician's assistant, standing not far away, also fell to the ground. Well, this didn't look like a magic performance. "Help! Help them!" Paul shouted. Marianne, Dezen, and Edward, who were not far away, stared dumbfounded at the scene before them. Dezen and Edward were confused. Marianne was even more bewildered. It shouldn't be like this. She hadn't even made a move yet. How could O'Donnell and Dezen have fallen? Egram stopped the Lord from personally intervening to help them. The other 4 guards rushed forward and helped the 2 magicians lying on the ground to their feet. Both of them had their eyes rolled back and were foaming at the mouth. "Sir, their breathing is normal, but their heartbeats are a little rapid," the guards reported. "Oh, may God bless these 2 poor souls. We must find a doctor for them quickly," Father Hershey said sadly. The 2 magicians had brought countless laughs to the children these past 2 days. Paul immediately ordered, "Use my horse to take them to Count Griles." Marianne snapped out of her shock, though she still didn't know what had happened. She gave Paul a warm smile. "No need to trouble you, we will take care of our companions. It's an old ailment of theirs, please don't worry." Chapter 653 A New Choice. In the inn in Lake Town, Marianne stared blankly out the window, lost in thought. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in, Mother." Nathan cautiously pushed the door open. Marianne looked at him. "How are O'Donnell and Dezen?" Nathan sighed. "They're still unconscious." He truly didn't understand what had happened, and Nathan hesitated, as if he had something to say but couldn't get it out. Marianne frowned. "What is it?" "That day at the church, I saw you pointed your hand at O'Donnell. So, did you do it?" Marianne smiled slightly. "You suspect I'm the one who did this to them?" Yes, Nathan nodded. Marianne shook her head. "Then you're blaming your mother." "O'Donnell and Durson had only themselves to blame," Nathan said incredulously. "You mean they suffered a backlash from the spell?" "Durson's case makes sense, but with Master O'Donnell's skill, facing such a young man, it seems impossible." Marianne was silent for a moment. She herself found it unbelievable. O'Donnell, who had dedicated his life to mental magic, had actually stumbled, and stumbled badly at that. It just goes to show, magic is always an awe-inspiring mystery. "We can't be so arrogant as to think we can completely control it," she said. "But," Nathan persisted, "even if it wasn't because of Mother, you did target O'Donnell back then, didn't you?" Sigh. Marianne sighed. "Do you remember what I told you in Horn Bay? The Gleman family of Northwest Bay has been kind to us, Mother." Nathan frowned. "I don't believe personal grudges should be placed above the overall cause of spellcasters." Marianne immediately rebuked sternly. "Your life was given to you by the Glemans. Was it that serious?" Nathan was startled. It seemed that before he could remember, his mother and he, as a child, must have encountered great danger in Northwest Bay. All right, although Nathan still didn't feel much affection for the Gleman family, after all, he had no memory of the family whatsoever, he was considerate of his mother's feelings. "Let's leave the operation against that count to this point. As for Barnett, we'll find another way. If all else fails, we'll give up." "What does his life or death have to do with us?" Marianne nodded. "We shouldn't have come here. Northwest Bay is a peaceful and tranquil land. It shouldn't be disturbed by outside conflicts." Nathan shrugged. neither agreeing nor disagreeing with her. Just then, there was another knock at the door. It was Edward, who came in to report, "Durson has woken up." The mage Durson stood quietly by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes darted around, carefully observing the streets and houses of Lake Town. In the distance, rows of factories stood like neatly arranged boxes, and thick black smoke billowed from the chimneys of the blast furnaces. Ah! So the gears had already started turning, he muttered to himself, his words unreadable. "Durson." Nathan pushed open the door and gave him a big hug. Marianne and Edward followed him in. "Brother, you scared me half to death. You just collapsed without a sound." Durson stiffly returned his hug. "Sorry to have worried you, it's good that you're awake." Nathan released him. Just as their eyes met, for a fleeting moment, Nathan noticed a strange look in the other's eyes. It was like pity? Maybe he was just imagining things, Nathan thought. "You were unconscious for 3 days and 3 nights, Marianne said gravely. "What exactly happened that day? What happened between you and your mentor?" Durson clutched his head, his face contorted. "My head starts throbbing whenever I try to recall that moment. I'm sorry, Ms. Marianne, I really can't remember the details." Maybe Professor O'Donnell's plan had some flaws," Marianne sighed, glancing at O'Donnell still lying on the bed, wondering when the old man would wake up. Edward suggested, "Perhaps we should let Durson rest first." Marianne agreed, "Yes, let's go out first. Durson, if your mentor wakes up, tell us." Durson nodded respectfully. The three left. Durson went to O'Donnell's bedside, looking at his mentor with a complex expression. "My dear mentor, thank you for your teachings all this time, and even more so for choosing me as your assistant in this spell. Although the spell failed, I can be said to have been reborn. I am no longer the Durson I once was," he said in an extremely sad tone. "Please forgive me for making this new choice." Inside the Lord's manor. "My Earl, you should change your coat," the old butler, Philip, respectfully suggested to Paul. "Ah, I remember wearing it only a few days ago," Paul, who had just returned from inspecting the military camp, asked casually. "Oh, it's been 3 days. Well, you remember very well." Paul smiled and began to take off his coat. Just as he was about to hand it to the butler, something fell from the coat pocket and landed on the ground with a thud. Paul picked it up from the ground, staring at it intently, his brow furrowing deeper. It was a pebble, entirely black. But 3 days ago it should have been white. He let out a long sigh, the ease on his face vanishing completely. Summon Reuben, Cecil, and Laddie. Half an hour later, the 3 men Paul had mentioned arrived at his study. The black stone lay quietly on the table. "Someone cast a spell on you without you even noticing," Laddie said in astonishment. "Obviously, isn't it? The magic stone has proven it." Paul's tone was somewhat anxious. In this world where mysterious powers manifested, someone had secretly cast a spell on him with unknown effects. Good heavens! Would he end up like Henry's older brother, the previous Duke of the Northwest? The crucial question was, who was it? Paul was filled with dread. The people of Horn Bay and Port Franklin seemed normal. "Earl, have you been in contact with any strangers recently?" Cecil asked. "A stranger? I've seen plenty of strangers these past few days. Let me think." Just as Paul was lost in thought, a guard came to report. "A man claiming to be a magician wants to see you." A magician? Paul suddenly remembered something. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 654 Collapse. "Mr. Dezin, I've seen you before." In the reception room, a man claiming to be a magician had been brought in and was under heavy surveillance. Paul looked at the man, recalling the scene in the church in Towder Village not long ago. Cecil sat to his left, Laddie to his right, and a crystal ball sat before the witch. Dezin sat upright, barely managing to suppress his inner excitement. He carefully observed the young lord opposite him, whom he had recently considered his target. From his appearance, he was just an ordinary Aldo. Paul said, "Perhaps you should explain the purpose of your visit." His lips moved slightly, and Dezin spoke. "Count Gleman, are you a god?" The reception room fell silent. No one had expected his first words to be like this. "Ha!" Paul's snicker broke the silence. "It's strange, why would you say that?" Durson glanced at the slightly glowing crystal ball in front of Laddie and said, This beautiful lady is a spellcaster. It seems you already know my identity, then I'll be frank with you. I am a spellcaster who studies the spiritual realm. That day in the church, as my mentor's assistant, I participated in the spying on your spiritual level. These words instantly reminded Paul of his strange experience that day. A large number of fragments hidden deep in his memory suddenly flashed through his mind. He instantly became highly tense. If this mage had seen enough, would he have already determined that he was a transmigrator from another world? Almost subconsciously, he said in an almost threatening tone, "I hope you can keep your head up." Oh, of course, Durson immediately realized that Earl Gleman didn't seem to have told those around him too much. So much so that he felt a sense of pride. He might be the only one who knew his secret. Perhaps for a moment there was a second person, and that was his mentor, Adenal. But only for that moment, poor Master Adenal. "So, if possible, I would like to speak with you alone." He carefully chose his words, cautiously making his request. Paul refused decisively. "I don't want to be alone in a room with a wizard. I swear I will not do anything hostile to you. Perhaps this lady can prove me right." Paul looked at Laddie, who was gazing at the crystal ball before her, and nodded gently. He certainly wasn't lying. But just to be safe, it would be best to tie his hands and feet, if you really want to speak with him alone. A few minutes later, in a small room, only Paul and the bound and gagged Durson remained. "Are you a god?" Durson asked his question again, but this time, his eyes were filled with fanaticism, an emotion so intense it seemed to burst forth in flames. His bound body trembled with excitement. He had become like this the moment the last person besides him and Paul left the room. "No," Paul gave a brief, negative answer. "Then you must be an emissary sent by the Lord of Light." The young mage's fervor remained undiminished. "You must have been sent by the gods to change this world." "Of course, perhaps you yourself are unaware of this," Paul asked. "You mages believe in the Lord of Light? Shouldn't they be mortal enemies?" Desmond immediately replied in fear, "Your Excellency, most of us only oppose the corrupt church and the prejudices of the world." Paul asked again, "What made you have such an absurd idea? What exactly happened in the church that day?" "Oh, please forgive my offense at that time. But it was precisely because of that sin that I came to know of your greatness." Desmond recalled the terror of that moment in the church and began to tell Paul. The moment the spell was activated, a surging torrent of information erupted. In the world of the mind, even the shock brought by a tsunami or volcanic eruption could not compare to that phenomenon. Instructor Adenal's mental barrier was undoubtedly very strong, but under such a massive impact, it was instantly shattered like paper. As an assistant, Durson didn't directly face such terrifying power, but even a small portion overflowing from his mentor's sea of souls made him feel as if he had instantly plunged into a vast ocean. At that moment, he was like a leaf, tossed about by raging waves. Durson understood why Master Adenal hadn't awakened yet. His sanity might have been completely annihilated by such a terrible impact. In fact, even Durson himself almost became like Adenal due to the sudden exposure to a large amount of incomprehensible information. A world of billions of people, giant cities capable of housing tens of millions, terrifying weapons that could destroy giant cities from thousands of miles away, flying iron birds, high-speed iron boxes, colossal buildings hundreds of meters tall, communication tools arriving in an instant. Durson could still withstand such images. But when exposed to more information, his worldview began to crumble. The Earth truly is a sphere, and the Sun is many times larger than the Earth. Earth, the solar system, black holes, the Milky Way, the local supercluster, the Laniakea supercluster. The vastness and wonder of the universe far exceed the limits of imagination, instantly plunging Desmond into a dilemma of questioning the meaning of his own existence. Position, speed of light, dimension, quantum, concepts crashed into his increasingly fragile mind like meteorites. Mass energy conversion, Newton's laws, the laws of thermodynamics, his previous understanding was so superficial. Such wondrous knowledge might be relatively easy for a child still in the learning and exploration stage to grasp, but Desmond was an adult with a somewhat rigid cognitive system. Given time to gradually learn, it was manageable. But when a flood of previously unheard of knowledge rushed in, clashing violently with his old understanding, it was unbearable. Especially because of the magic, Desmond knew unequivocally that they were all correct, at least correct compared to his original understanding, and his old worldview instantly crumbled. The above only represents the depth of information. As for the breadth of information, that's even more terrifying. America, 996, slacking off, computers, biology, code, Skyrim, Paradox Interactive, Doujinshi, Hotano. These chaotic and disordered things are the main body of the information flood. Chapter 655 Confession. Lord Gleman, the visions that appear in your mind, they must be from the divine realm, right? The mage named Dezen looked at Paul with shining eyes. Paul shook his head and said, I am neither a god nor from the divine realm, but the mage sitting opposite him still had a you can't fool me look on his face. Paul could only give up correcting his point of view. Speaking of which, Mr. Dezen, what should I do with you? The mage was startled. Paul threatened him, even if you didn't harm me, you still had the intention, at least it was an attempted attack. Oh. Lord Gleman, I confess to you. You confess so readily. Yes, I am guilty. I am willing to accept any punishment you give me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to see you the first thing after I regained consciousness. I had already considered all the consequences before I came. The mage's face was sincere, not feigned. This, Paul didn't know what to say. A look of longing appeared on Dezen's face. Though it may seem shameless, I still wish to ask you to grant me a chance to atone for my sins. I hope to offer my loyalty to you, to serve you as your servant, to witness many miracles unfold by your side, and to contribute my insignificant strength. Is this the legendary outburst of domineering aura, with subordinates bowing down in submission? Paul asked suspiciously, what is your motive for doing this? Why did you abandon your mage companion, Lord Giles? What is in your mind is real, achievable. Although I have only glimpsed a small part, I know you must have a clear path in your mind. For me, rather than participating in a gamble with many uncertain outcomes, it is better to follow a guide familiar with a certain path. Paul did not understand the mage's meaning. Derson continued, from you I have come into contact with things far beyond the comprehension of everyone in this world. An imprint has been deeply etched into my soul. Only under your guidance can this world become a better place, only by following you as one following the right path. To hell with you. Paul scoffed. Even if you say that, I cannot accept someone of unknown origin, especially a wizard, as my subordinate. It's neither rationally nor emotionally permissible. I know this is sudden, Derson said frankly. Please give me at least some time to prove my loyalty. Until then, I'm willing to tell you everything I know. Of course, even if you don't accept my allegiance, I will still tell you. After all, our time is running out. Time is running out, Paul exclaimed in surprise. What do you mean? Derson's expression turned grave. Humanity's greatest enemy is coming. Paul's eyelids twitched. Orcs, no, an enemy even more terrifying than orcs. Demons, demons. A storm raged in Paul's heart. Damn it, is the eternal villain of the fantasy world finally about to make his appearance? Paul struggled to remain calm. Explain yourself clearly, Count. Since you have spellcaster subordinates, you must know about the Arcane Society, right? Yes, this matter needs to be explained from three aspects: the legend of the ancient war between humans and demons, the legacy of the Arcane Society, and the mysterious celestial phenomena. And so, Dezen recounted everything he knew, including the alliance between the Arcane Society and the Scholar's Tower, and their long-term plans. The Scholar's Tower's interpretation of the celestial phenomena caused immense panic. Perfectly aligning with the Arcane Society, first, control a powerful nation with considerable influence on the continent, then use its political power to whitewash the spellcasters' identities, allowing them to walk in the sunlight. Due to Antonio's special status, he is both heir to the throne and possesses the bloodline and abilities of the Arcane Society's founder. He is the chosen one, the natural leader of the Arcane Society. To ensure the process of controlling Gabella remains unaffected, it's necessary to weaken and preoccupied forces like the Waldo and the Papacy. Once Gabella is stable and other continental powers have weakened, it will be time to initiate the unification process among human nations. The ultimate goal is to integrate the power of all humanity to jointly confront a legendary enemy, the demon. The most crucial element is organizing all spellcasters to research and develop magic, because the legendary demon possesses powerful magic. Only magic can counter magic, and humanity needs this power. Paul listened, increasingly alarmed. The Aldo's internal strife, the witch hunts of Horn Bay. It turned out an unseen hand was at work behind the scenes. This sinister hand had even reached the Northwest base several years ago. The pirate invasion was their doing, and the wizard who ambushed him on the way and was shot to death was a member of the Arcane Society. Outrageous. Just because of a vague ancient myth, other countries are plunged into war and turmoil. He couldn't help but be furious. I think it's just that spellcasters are looking for a plausible reason to make themselves the ruling class. Paul had heard about the long-standing war between humans and demons since childhood, but he wasn't particularly interested. Originating in an era before the invention of writing, and embellished through generations of oral transmission, how much truth could such legends retain? Paul was highly skeptical. Perhaps it was just two primitive tribes fighting. The major civilizations on Earth also had their own legends of ancient wars. The scenes were simply incredible. A war between humans and demons? Could it compare to a village brawl on the Fujian coast? The latter involved recorded battles with firearms and cannons. Durson remained non-committal in response to Paul's accusations. They really believe in this stuff. It's said the Scholar's Tower studied many ancient human civilizations and came to this conclusion. Then, Durson began reciting the prophetic poem from that ancient civilization. The Great Destroyer came to this world from the other world through a non-existent gate. He created his own kin on Earth and forged his army of steel. They wielded weapons that breathed fire, slaughtering all living beings of flesh and blood. The kin celebrated their victory, erecting sacrificial pillars across the land. Vicious black mist spewed from the tops of the pillars, obscuring the sun, moon, and stars. Nauseating black water flowed from the bases, infiltrating rivers and seas. These evil creatures created countless plagues and monsters among humankind. Paul listened quietly, but Durson's voice gradually faded until it was barely audible. He stared at Paul, dumbfounded, a flicker of fear in his eyes. Paul was puzzled. What's wrong? Continue. At this moment, Durson was filled with doubt and uncertainty. It was too similar. No, the scene I saw was bright, creative, and progressive. Full of positive energy, not dark, decaying, or regressive. It must just be a coincidence. Chapter 656 The Chase. What's wrong with you now? Paul asked, noticing Durson's awkward expression. Nothing. Lord Giles, what will you do with me? Paul replied, HMPH, I can give you a chance. After all, those with magic are special talents in a way. Thank you. Durson was so excited that he forgot he was tied up and tried to stand up, only to be squeezed so tightly that his whole body ached. Actually, you don't know, I'm also an Aldo. If it weren't for my identity as a spellcaster, I wouldn't have gone to such a distant land to do this. Calm down. Mr. Durson, even so, you will be under close scrutiny until you prove your loyalty. I will certainly not let you down. Lord Giles, listen, I'll call my men in later. Tell them about the Arcane Society, but, Paul warned him sternly, don't say a word about things you shouldn't. I understand. Lord Giles, Durson knew that Earl Giles didn't want anyone to know what was going on in his head. Bring Cecil and Laddie in. The two waiting outside quickly responded. What? This mage wants to pledge allegiance to you. They were both astonished after hearing Paul's account. Paul ordered, untie him first. With Laddie present, he wasn't afraid of what this guy named Durson might be up to. He had Durson repeat what he had just said. The Mystic Society, does it really have such a massive plan? Laddie was shocked. Back in Horn Bay, the Mystic Society had invited her, but she felt the organization's views were too radical and didn't join. She never imagined they were secretly doing this. It sounds like something out of a novel. Cecil stroked his chin, looking utterly incredulous. You really believe him that much? Why would he pledge allegiance to you for no reason and betray his former comrades? It's not something that can be explained in a few words. Paul simply stopped explaining. Laddie can vouch for the truth of his words, right? The witch, holding her gleaming crystal ball, nodded. There's a 99% chance it's true. Cecil asked, should we expose their conspiracy to the world? Paul shook his head. I'm worried that this will provoke their furious retaliation. A large group of wizards flooding into the Northwest Bay to wreak havoc. Just thinking about it gives me a headache. He also had another concern. The Church might use the Arcane Society's conspiracy to strengthen its presence and increase its influence. My lords, let's put aside a distant future for now. I suggest you focus on the Arcane Society members who have infiltrated Alda. Durson solemnly suggested, that is, my former comrades. Arrest them, control them, or simply destroy them. Durson is right, although Paul was surprised that his comrade had betrayed him so readily. Allowing several uncontrolled spellcasters to operate under his nose was indeed not a good thing. Laddie looked at Durson. How strong are they? Durson replied, they are all skilled spellcasters, especially fire magic, and one red-haired mage named Marianne is particularly powerful. If they stay in the inn, it will be troublesome to hold out against them using the building as a last resort. Therefore, I suggest that you, Lord Giles, Bring in a dozen cannons and blast them and the building to smithereens. That won't do. There are other people inside, and the buildings are densely packed. Who knows where the shells will hit? Paul rejected the idea without hesitation, looking at Dessen. Mage, now is your chance to prove your loyalty. Dessen's eyes widened, and he pointed to his nose. Me, yes, find a way to lure them out to a secluded place. We'll catch them there. Dessen's shopping trip has been a bit long, Nathan said with some worry. I have a bad feeling. He and Edward were playing cards idly, while Marianne was meditating in her room next door. As if confirming his bad premonition, the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs echoed. Bang! The door opened, and Durson burst in. My God, man! What happened to you? Nathan stared in shock at Durson's bruised and swollen face. What a disaster. I got into a fight with a bunch of thugs, Edward teased. That must have been an unforgettable shopping trip. How many? Durson hesitated, like a child caught doing something wrong. We need to get out of here quickly. Why? I couldn't resist using a little magic trick to get back at them, so, Nathan clutched his forehead. Damn it. You used magic in the street. Stop talking, Durson yelled. Hurry up and pack your things, and call Lady Marianne. Half an hour later, a carriage left the inn and headed out of Lake Town. On the road outside the city, Nathan said with a hint of regret, to be honest, I quite like this place. I'll definitely miss Arda. Edward asked curiously, it's rare to see you express such feelings. I can't quite explain it, Nathan said, shaking his head. It's as if my soul resonates with this land. It's a strange feeling. As they were talking, a rapid clatter of hooves sounded from behind. They looked back and saw a large group of knights, about 20 men, galloping towards them along the road they had just traveled. Looking for us? I don't think a bunch of thugs could put on such a show. What if the thugs told the church or the Lord about Durson's trick? In any case, let's pull over, and of course, be prepared for battle. They pulled their carriage over to the side of the road. The knights arrived in an instant, surrounding the carriage. Nathan had a bad feeling. These guys in uniform were after them. Especially Paul Gleman was in the middle. Haha, we meet again, the great Earl Gleman. It was such a pity I couldn't perform magic for you last time. Have you come to make up for it? Nathan stood on the ground, bowing exaggeratedly to Paul. A rustling sound rang out, and Durson noticed that all the knights had removed long, tubular objects with wooden supports from their mounts and pointed them at them. What did this mean? Were they weapons? Paul sat on his mount, a distance away. He said expressionlessly, there are some things I need your cooperation in investigating. Hearing this, Nathan knew something was wrong. The Earl must have noticed something. Durson, that idiot. He still thought Durson had accidentally cast a spell during a fight with the thugs, causing this scene. That's a pity, Your Excellency. We're all in a hurry. The fawning expression he had put on vanished, replaced by a coldness on Nathan's face. Chapter 657. A Strange Fate. The knights parted to let a green-haired woman step forward. Wow. A beauty, Nathan whistled, his smile returning. But it froze instantly. A flame appeared out of thin air in the green-haired woman's hand. As a spellcaster skilled in fire magic, Nathan could tell this wasn't magic. Edward exclaimed, a spellcaster, Laddie Sisha commanded sternly. I hope you won't resist, or it will be dangerous. Tisk tisk tisk. Beautiful lady, please allow me to explain. Nathan recovered from his surprise. Perhaps you don't know, but we are the same as you, the same spellcasters, right? Laddie retorted. That's precisely why we're arresting you, Nathan scoffed. What if I refuse? Hey. Gentlemen, let's not start a fight, Edward said, trying to smooth things over. So, he lowered his voice to Laddie, that Earl Giles has become your servant. Though his voice was soft, many could still hear him, and the guards' expressions turned angry. Edward said this because of the old tradition among mages, to seduce a lord from a remote region, making him submit to the power of magic and become their servant. This was also one of the reasons for the sordid image of spellcasters. Then you're wrong, Laddie denied. On the contrary, I am Earl Giles' servant. To have fallen so low, Nathan and Edward were both furious. A spellcaster of such stature bowing down to a mortal, the atmosphere immediately became tense, and muskets were raised and aimed at the two of them. All right, calm down, a rather authoritative female voice rang out. The carriage door opened, and the red-haired Marianne jumped to the ground. Laddie's pupils widened. Teacher, teacher? Paul, Nathan, Edward, and the circle of guards were all stunned. What a wonderful fate, Mariana said with a smile to her former student. Laddie, I never expected we'd meet in the Northwest Bay. Is she the genius student you always talk about? Nathan suddenly remembered something. So this was the other people's child his mother had been talking about. Laddie didn't know what to say. Paul had never seen her so flustered before. He cleared his throat, drawing Mariana's attention. Beautiful ladies, I can find you a place to catch up. For Laddie's sake, I promise to guarantee your safety. Please come with us. Of course, I'll search you for anything suspicious, okay? Ignoring the puzzled looks on Nathan and Edward's faces, Mariana agreed. Now that you know his identity and have taken in a spellcaster as your subordinate, I don't think Earl Gleman is the kind of person who holds stereotypes about us, and your guards are surely capable of keeping secrets. Seeing that the other party agreed, Paul ordered a body search, with Laddie in charge of her teacher. But an unexpected incident occurred. Nathan cooperated very reluctantly and was slightly hurt by the guards. He immediately flew into a rage, and flames suddenly erupted from his hand. A barrage of firearms were pointed at him. Mariana hurriedly shouted, "You can't hurt him," Paul coldly said. "I don't think he has any sense of being a prisoner." He had long disliked this arrogant young man. Paul drew his sidearm, intending to intimidate him. Nathan sneered, his fighting spirit instantly rising. "No, you can't. Paul, please." Mariana was very anxious, her previous composure completely gone. Fear and worry filled her face. "He's your brother." The words caused an instant silence. "What did you say?" Paul took a long time to react. "Madam, I understand your desire to protect him, but this kind of lie is absurd," he chuckled. "I did have a brother, but tragically, he died young. Based on what you just said, I could send you all to jail without any other reason." Laddie was astonished that her teacher would fabricate such a ridiculous reason. "No," Mariana said calmly, "but sadly, your brother didn't die. He's standing right in front of you." Nathan couldn't help but cry out, "Mom, this was too shameful." They were just ordinary people, and their mother was trying to escape through lies. And who would believe such a lie? Mariana ignored Nathan, staring intently at Paul. "And I am your mother." The witch's lips didn't move, but Paul clearly heard the words. He was struck dumb. "Ha ha, ha ha," Paul laughed loudly, pointing at Marianne. "Did you hear her joke?" They couldn't hear it. The voice in his head rose again. Paul angrily cracked his whip. "It's utterly ridiculous." "Madman, handcuff them all." The guards grabbed the shackles and were about to pounce. "You have a diamond-shaped birthmark on the inside of your thigh. You should know that, right?" It was the red-haired witch's voice again. "But wait," Paul roared. The guards immediately stopped. Paul looked at the red-haired witch, his expression strange. A long silence followed. Everyone could sense something was wrong from the Count's expression. What the witch said, could it be true? Looking at Count Giles, then at the wizard boy who had been so arrogant just moments before but now looked completely bewildered, the resemblance was growing stronger. Perhaps the old Count had fathered him outside? The guards who were about to put the shackles on him hesitated and stepped back. Paul frowned, somewhat annoyed, and asked Marianne, "What exactly happened?" Marianne smiled, but somewhat reluctantly. "It's complicated, too much to explain in a few words." HMPH, Paul pointed to the carriage. "Get in, come back with us." "Yes, Count Giles," the witch replied playfully, bowing gracefully before turning to the carriage. Although she didn't know what fate awaited her, a heavy weight had finally been lifted from her heart. A suppressed instinct was released, and time seemed to rewind more than a decade, when she too had lived on this land. Nathan tugged at his mother's sleeve. Could it really be true? "Shut up, you brat," Marianne glared at him. "What were you thinking?" Yes, it must be something Mother made up to escape danger," Nathan thought in a panic, completely unable to accept it. Marianne boarded the carriage. Inside were two other people, Otto, still unconscious, and Durson, who was caring for him. "You seem very calm," Marianne frowned. "Oh, could it get any worse?" Lady Crimson Flame, the carriage, escorted by a group of attendants, headed towards Lake Town. Laddie, Paul, mounted on his horse, softly called to his mystical advisor. "Paul, my mind is a mess," Laddie replied listlessly. Meeting her teacher, whom she hadn't seen for years, was shocking enough. But now the Earl had encountered his brother. If it was true, it truly confirmed her teacher's words. What a strange fate. Chapter 658 Recognition. In the study of the Lord's Manor in Laketown, Paul sat upright, with Lady Saoirse beside him. He certainly couldn't immediately believe the woman's words. Besides Laddie, he had taken other precautions. A pistol lay on the table. Marianne and Nathan were invited in. Marianne glanced around the study, a look of reminiscence on her face. The castle's decor has changed a lot, but this room remains unchanged. Laddie felt something was amiss. Had her teacher been here? Paul didn't answer, instead asking the servant who had led Marianne in, "Where's Butler Philip?" "I need him here immediately," the servant replied. "I'll go find him right away," Paul added, "and Cecil and Bryce, I expect them here as well." "As you command." The servant left. Marianne smiled at Paul. "What, you still don't believe me?" Paul gestured. "Please sit down. Perhaps you can moisten your throats with the water on the coffee table. We'll have a lot to say later." Laddie was increasingly puzzled and asked, "What's going on?" Paul shrugged. "This woman, your teacher, said she's my mother." PFFT, Nathan, holding a glass of water, spat it out. Laddie was so shocked she couldn't speak, her eyes wide. Nathan put down his glass, looking terrified. "No, Mom, this isn't true." Instinctively, Nathan felt his mother wasn't lying about Paul being his brother, but he was afraid to face it. But if it was true, another possibility arose, leaving his mind in turmoil for a long time. "It's true." Marianne looked at her second son and said seriously, "Nathan, you have a surname, Gleman. Your full name is Nathan Gleman, and I am Marianne Gleman." Paul waved his hand in front of Laddie to bring her back to her senses. "That's the situation." Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Paul snapped his fingers. "Butler Philip is here. We'll soon find out the truth." "Madam, I'm a magnanimous man. If it's false, you still have one last chance. You actually doubt your own mother. I should slap you a few times to make you remember," Marianne thought to herself. Guilt, longing, eagerness, sadness, resentment, a mixture of emotions made her slightly irrational. Seeing that she didn't respond, Paul called out, "Come in, Butler Philip." The old butler pushed the door open and entered. Marianne turned to look at the doorway. The door stopped halfway open. Philip saw her. "Long time no see, Philip." Marianne's voice trembled with emotion upon seeing her old servant. "Madam," the old butler's voice choked with emotion, his somewhat cloudy eyes instantly welling up with tears. "Well, it was true after all." Paul finally confirmed it. "I had intended to live a peaceful life in the Northwest Bay as an ordinary person." Marianne sat on the sofa, recounting the events of over a decade ago. "But the Vatican's lackeys who had been tracking me also came, secretly searching for my whereabouts. At that time, I had just given birth to Nathan, and my use of magic was extremely unstable. If my identity as a witch were confirmed, I would be powerless to resist. With no other choice, I had to painfully part from you and your father, taking Nathan with me and leaving the Northwest Bay, claiming to the outside world that I had died of illness. I stayed in Horn Bay for a long time, teaching Laddie how to use magic there. After that, we went inland and joined the Arcane Order there." It took nearly 2 hours for Marianne to recount her experiences over the years. Philip took out a handkerchief and kept wiping his eyes. "Madam Marianne, you have suffered so much these years." Marianne gave a bitter smile. "It wasn't too difficult, though. Compared to those mages who suffered tragic fates, we were still lucky." But, her eyes reddened, and tears welled up. "I didn't get to see Hart one last time before he was gone." Hart is old Gleman's name. Upon arriving in Arda, she learned of her husband's death and secretly hid away to weep bitterly. She even considered killing Edward, who was traveling with her. From the intelligence she gathered, she learned that the departure of this pirate captain had left the pirates in the Northwest Seas unrestrained, leading to her husband's death. Edward bore indirect responsibility. But she desperately suppressed this thought, at least not now. Present were her son, servants, and students. No outsiders were present. Having confided her long-hidden secret, Marianne couldn't help but weep again. Laddie stood up and went forward, silently embracing her teacher tightly. Philip tried to comfort her. "Please accept my condolences, madam. The old master would be overjoyed to know you are back in this home." He then looked at Nathan, the young man who was bewildered by his weeping mother. He swore to God he had never seen his mother cry before. Marianne had always presented him with an image of strength, optimism, composure, and wisdom. Young Master Nathan, Butler Philip's eyes were red, but his face was full of relief. "You've grown into a healthy young man. I think the old master must be very pleased in heaven." Nathan moved his lips, completely at a loss for words. Why did you take my brother with you? It must have been very inconvenient to have a child with you. Paul, who had been silent all along, suddenly spoke up. That's because Mariana felt a strange sense of unease. Was her eldest son blaming her? Your brother inherited my talent. He showed an affinity for magic from birth. If we hadn't taken him, he would have been exposed very quickly, since he didn't know how to disguise himself at the time. I see, Paul nodded. Alright, let's talk about the Arcane Society again. Earl Giles, Laddie called out to him, with a hint of reproach in her voice. She walked over to Paul and leaned down to whisper, I think you should give your mother and brother a hug first. Paul hesitated for a moment, then went to Marianne and opened his arms. Welcome home, my mother. Before he could finish speaking, Marianne embraced him tightly. My child, do you know how much your mother has missed you? Paul stiffly allowed his mother's embrace and gentle sniffs. Almost every night, you appear in my dreams. Really? Paul was puzzled, a hint of resentment mixed in. Then why were you in such a hurry to leave Arda? If I hadn't stopped you, this wouldn't have happened. Chapter 659 Confession 1. Seeing his inexplicably new brother embracing his mother, Nathan felt a surge of anger. Don't joke around, he shouted angrily. I don't have any nonsensical brother. He stepped forward and pulled Marianne away. Mother, you're lying to them, aren't you? It's a lie you made up to escape their pursuit, my child. Marianne hugged him tenderly. I'm sorry I've kept your origins a secret for so many years, but it's the truth. No, Nathan was about to retort when there was another knock at the door. Marianne blinked. I guess Cecil and Bryce have arrived, right? The door opened, and sure enough, the two entered. My God. There are people who look so alike. The two were stunned upon entering. Ahem, Butler Philip solemnly reminded them, it's not just a resemblance, she is our mistress. You should pay your respects to her. Marianne greeted them with a smile. Long time no see. Bryce, Cecil, what's going on? Bryce couldn't help but ask. Philip then recounted the whole story. The two men were even more astonished, but since it was undeniable, they bowed to Marianne. Madam, it's incredible. We witnessed your burial ourselves. Of course, we're very happy you're still alive, Philip explained. The coffin contained wood. Bryce was furious. You old man, are you the only one who knows the truth? You've kept it from us for so many years. Philip looked innocent. The old master forbade it, even our current earl doesn't know. Oh, by the way, Madam later became Miss Cecia's teacher. Fate is truly wondrous. Yes, I only just found out myself. I called you here to confirm it, Paul testified for him. Now, gentlemen, and Laddie, I'd like to speak with Paul alone. I hope you can grant me this small request. To others, this seemed reasonable. After all, mother and son had been separated for so many years, they must have had endless things to say. But Paul felt that his mother wanted more than just to confide in him. Of course, Philip said. It's your right. Gentlemen, let's go. He looked at Nathan. Young Master Nathan, please come with me. Let your mother and brother have some time alone. I think you'll be interested in visiting the ancestral castle. Oh, poor little Nathan, forced to leave here at birth. Nathan was led away by Philip, stunned. Bryce and Cecil's confirmation had completely broken him. The others also got up to leave. Paul suddenly said, I think, shouldn't Laddie stay too? She is your student after all. Marianne glanced at Laddie. No, I'll talk to her alone later, then I'll go out first. Laddie looked disappointed. She seemed somewhat weak in front of her teacher. Everyone left. The door closed, leaving only Paul and Marianne. As soon as the footsteps outside disappeared, Marianne glared at Paul with a stern look, startling him. It was as if some long-buried memory had been awakened. Explain yourself, why do you keep a witch around, huh? Paul was dumbfounded by her question. Marianne frowned. Don't you know? Witches are dangerous. Her brow furrowed, her face showing worry. Father, you haven't been bewitched by Lottie, have you? Paul said, considering your status, it's strange to hear you say that. I'm still your mother, isn't it normal to worry? Paul chuckled. Didn't another Earl of Giles also keep a witch by his side and have two sons with her? Marianne blushed. My situation is different from your father's. You can't use an exception as a precedent, my respected mother. Paul said with certainty, you can rest assured that your student is a loyal, reliable, and capable lady. Her character is absolutely impeccable. She has helped me solve many problems. My relationship with Lady Cecia is just that of a normal lord and subject. Is that so? Marianne said with great suspicion. The more you describe her as perfect, the more suspicious I become. Is there really nothing between you and her? Okay, I admit it, Paul shrugged. There's a bit of platonic, spiritual attraction between us. After all, Laddie is a very charming woman, and as for your son, I don't seem that bad, but that's all. Besides, I'm already engaged, Mariana asked anxiously. Engaged? To whom? Paul smiled. You might not believe it, but it's Princess Catherine Rodney of the royal family. Princess Catherine. Mariana was indeed shocked. How could she be engaged to a lord of the Northwest Bay? She suddenly felt as if struck by lightning. Wait, you're going to marry into the royal family? As far as I know, Princess Catherine plays an important role in the kingdom's politics, and the royal family has every reason to keep her in the Rodney family. The more Mariana thought about it, the more she felt that Paul was going to change his surname. Then she became angry. How can this be? Paul, you are your father's eldest son, bearing the heavy responsibility of continuing the Griles family bloodline. Hey, I need to correct you on one point, Paul emphasized. It was His Majesty the King who begged and pleaded to marry his sister to me, he boasted a little. This is true, Mariana was incredulous. You'll find out when the time comes, if you're still here. Oh, Paul. Mariana was touched on a soft spot, and she hesitated. Finally, he said, I have very important things to do. Very important things, Paul asked tentatively. Is it the matter of the Arcane Society? How did you know? Mariana was surprised at first, then immediately realized, and said bitterly, it's that guy, Durson, isn't it? That traitor. I should have exposed him long ago. You knew? HMPH, accidentally using magic in a street fight. What a lame excuse. Well, my son, Mariana sat down at the desk, her tone softening as she said, yes, I am now a member of the Arcane Society, so, what Durson said is true. What did he tell you? Everything, Paul replied, everything he knows, ancient legends, mysterious celestial phenomena, mysterious prophecies, your alliance with the Scholar's Tower, and what's happening behind the scenes of the Gabella Empire. Chapter 660 Confession 2. Marianne paused for a moment. After a long while, she said, all right, my child. Now that you know, what's your opinion? Do you want the truth? Of course, Paul shrugged. Incredible, or rather, absurd, Marianne frowned, displeased. Is that how you view the cause your mother fought for? Don't you think, Paul said with amusement, that the so-called myth of the war between humans and demons is just a conflict between primitive tribes in ancient times? As for those mysterious celestial phenomena, they're just coincidences, or rather, as long as it's far-fetched enough, any two things in the world can be connected, or rather, it's just an excuse to let spellcasters come into the sunlight. Marianne smiled. What, isn't that good? If spellcasters could stand in the sunlight without any worries, our family wouldn't be in this situation. Yes, that's certainly good, Paul agreed with her. But I think achieving this goal requires making spellcasters more ordinary, integrating them with ordinary people, making magic a common skill like writing, martial arts, or even shoe repair and sewing. The Arcane Society's approach seems to be making spellcasters special, which is going from one extreme to another. Paul's words momentarily angered Marianne. Paul was comparing the great magic to the skills of ordinary people. It was blasphemous. But she quickly calmed down and found the reason in her son. Poor child, he must be feeling wronged. They were born of the same mother, but his younger brother displayed extraordinary magical talent and was raised by their mother, while he lacked such talent and was left behind. Yes, her son must have said those words because he felt wronged. Perhaps there was a little jealousy in his heart. As his mother, she had to understand him. Poor child. What's wrong? Her son's question brought Marianne back to her senses. She couldn't help but reach out and hold her son's hand, saying with pity, poor child, Paul? Mariana was about to offer some words of comfort when she suddenly thought of hurting her son's pride. So she decided to change the subject. Paul, I want to ask you for a favor, please speak, Mariana said. The world may become chaotic in the coming period, but the Northwest Bay is a haven, always unknown on the political map of Alder. If the Arcane Society can truly extend its reach here, I think I can keep the Northwest Bay free from outside interference. So you shouldn't actively interfere in external affairs, but live quietly here and continue the Griles bloodline. Paul smiled. I understand what you mean, but it was impossible. With economic development, the Northwest base connections with other parts of the kingdom were becoming increasingly close. He was considering how to explain to his mother when Mariana spoke first, "The Orc army is about to enter Alder. If the royal family orders you to send troops, you must find an excuse." "What did you say?" Paul jumped up from his seat, his face full of shock. Mariana also became serious. "I can't go into the specifics, but the Orcish army will be here soon, that's for sure. But don't worry, as long as you stay put in the Northwest Bay, nothing will happen." Paul forced himself to calm down. This is truly unbelievable news, my dear mother. It's hard to imagine that the impregnable Watcher's fortress couldn't stop the orcs. It has stood at the entrance to Gabella Valley for nearly 1,000 years. The orcs have other routes. In any case, they will enter the northeast of the kingdom. Mariana wasn't as wary in front of her son, mentioning it casually. Paul's mind, however, was racing. Other routes, by sea? Absolutely impossible. Then it must be the Rocky Mountains? Could there be secret passages there unknown to the world? Also, since Mother knows about this, it means the Arcane Society knows about it. Is the Orcish invasion related to the Arcane Society and Gabella? He instantly thought of the rebellion in the south. According to Dezen, it was also secretly instigated by the Arcane Society, perhaps wanting to plunge the north of Gabella into chaos as well, ultimately serving the Arcane Society's goal of unifying human power across the continent. Paul smiled and said, "Thank you for reminding me, Mother. I don't want to put you in a difficult position, but could you tell me how fast the so-called soon will be? Half a year? Or a year?" Mariana hesitated for a moment. "From now on, I estimate no more than a quarter." Time was of the essence. Paul glanced at the grandfather clock. "I suddenly remembered I have some very important matters to attend to. How about we stop here for today? I know you've been traveling, and perhaps you need to rest." Mariana hesitated, "But I still want to stay with you a little longer." "I'm so sorry, my child, I cannot stay here long." Paul showed a regretful expression, "But staying for a few days should be possible, right?" "A few days is fine." A sense of guilt prompted Mariana to answer. Paul smiled. "I'll visit and keep you company every day. Don't worry. Philip will take care of my brother. Goodbye." Without waiting for her reply, he turned and left the study. Hearing Paul's hurried footsteps, Mariana felt a pang of unease. Paul, rushing off, felt even more anxious. While the world had concepts of nation and ethnicity, these were merely objective descriptions, lacking any spiritual or sacred connotations. But for Paul, whose past life's knowledge and present identity were intertwined, nation and ethnicity held profound significance. Other lords might ignore events outside their territories, but Paul found it difficult to accept, especially while he still possessed certain abilities. The rebellion in the south was, after all, an internal conflict within the Alder. But the orcs of the grasslands were a different matter. Paul summoned several attendants. "I need all the heads of government departments and officers of battalion level and above in the army to come to the Lord's Manor for a meeting." Seeing the Lord's anxious expression, the attendants quickly went to relay the message. 2 others were left behind. Paul instructed them, "I need to write 2 letters immediately, one to Crystal and one to Watcher's Fortress." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 661 The Reason for the War. "Perhaps you should have told me immediately, Old Ford, the Grand Steward of the State Council and Paul's father's Keeper of the Seals," said somewhat displeased upon learning of Paul's mother's return. "I'm sorry, I wasn't sure at the time. If it was truly a hoax, it wouldn't have been worth your trip." Paul did feel somewhat guilty. After all, Mr. Ford was the most senior retainer of the Griles family. "All right, we have more important matters to discuss now." Old Ford suppressed his urge to immediately meet with his former mistress. Within a quarter of a year, the Orcish army may enter the northeastern region of the kingdom. The source should be reliable. The military and political leaders of Lacquer Town had gathered in the conference room, and Paul announced this shocking news to them. "May the Father in heaven bless us." Schroeder made a prayerful gesture. When he learned from Paul that the orcs were about to launch an attack, he didn't seem too surprised. "When I was forced to leave Watcher's Fortress, I knew this day would come sooner or later," For many years, Schroeder hadn't liked to talk about his past at Watcher's Fortress. Now he was confiding in Paul. The lords of the entire Northeast were in dire straits when the Watchers protected them, yet the lords viewed the Legion as a spy for them from the royal family. Though outwardly appearing united, their vigilance was ever present, and I, precisely because I tried to expose their illegal activities, smuggling with the orcs of the plains, was collectively boycotted, ultimately forced to leave the Watchers and return to the Northwest Bay to retire. Schroeder's angry narration greatly surprised Paul. In his memory, Schroeder had always been a calm, composed, and unflappable man. This was the first time he had seen him so out of sorts. For decades, they have continuously supplied the plains with salt, grain, and precious metal tools. The orcs rise to this level, even daring to attack the Alder, is at least half due to the corrupt lords of the Northeast, the old knight asserted. This made Paul blush slightly, wondering if sending his fleet to trade with the orcs in the forest counted as supplying them with resources. Well, the forest orcs and their relatives on the plains were two different things, he consoled himself. Paul surveyed the crowd. Therefore, we should prepare in time, Earl. We should immediately expand our army. Brad stood up and said. Expand 4 half battalions into full battalions, and add more battalions. The number of frontline combat personnel should be increased to around 30,000. Seconded. The army generals had always been concerned about the development of the navy, due to its reliance on maritime trade. Alda's navy was already close to 20,000 men, with large ships and cannons, making the army seem like a little brother in comparison. Ahem, Old Ford reminded them, if we follow the current equipment standards, the state council can't come up with that much money to expand such a large army all at once, then issue bonds, Brad exclaimed, his eyes wide. Wasn't that how we did it when we fought the Kent family? Old Ford said. We gained a lot after defeating the Kent family, so paying off the debt was easy. But fighting the orcs is different, Brad. Even if we successfully defend our homeland, do you have the ability to venture deep into the plains and plunder the orcs' wealth to pay off the debt? Brad choked. Fighting on the plains required horses? But Arda didn't even have a decent cavalry. Your Excellency, I think we need to establish a cavalry. Brad blurted out whatever came to mind. Schroeder sighed. Lord Gleman, our militia is very well trained, even surpassing the troops under other local lords. Perhaps we should first organize them into a regular army. Expanding our army to around 15,000 men seems like a suitable number. Then let's do as Schroeder says, Paul agreed. Perhaps we should add regimental level units. We should strengthen intelligence work on the steppes. Paul proactively instructed the intelligence department. The orc culture, their social structure, their population, their technological level, the connections between their various tribes, these are all things I want to know. As you wish. Cecil wrote down Paul's words. I think their relatives in Lucky Forest are a good starting point. You're right. We should make good use of that great forest north of the Rocky Mountains, Paul agreed. Lucky Forest is adjacent to the Great Plains. We should maintain good relations with the native tribes there, whether they are native orcs or native humans. Perhaps in our future war with the Plains orcs, Lucky Forest will play a powerful restraining role. Hansel asked, shouldn't we inform Crystal Radiance about this? If it were a few years ago, he would have been furious and made Paul warn the royal family immediately. Paul replied, I've already written to Crystal Radiance, and another to Watcher's Fortress. I don't know if it'll be in time. I also plan to convene the Lords of the Northwest to discuss a joint effort to resist the orcs. From now on, steel, firearms, and food will be our primary focus. Mariana suddenly had a strong premonition that her son Paul was likely hiding something from her. The next day at breakfast, she learned of this from Paul. Arda was preparing to defend against the orc invasion. Mariana panicked. You can safely stay out of it, is that so? Paul wiped his mouth with a napkin, stood up, and walked to the window. Look outside. Is anything different since you left Northwest Bay? Mariana glanced out the window. It's much more prosperous now. The towns have expanded many times over. Not only that, but the people's clothing, food, housing, and even their spirit had undergone tremendous changes. So much so that when Mariana first set foot on the land of Northwest Bay, she wondered if she had come to the wrong place. She said earnestly, I can see that you are more capable than any Earl Greyman of the past, Paul. So please cherish your achievements. Paul replied, all these achievements are thanks to the power of trade. The entire kingdom is inextricably linked to the Northwest Bay. If other places fall into chaos, The prosperity of the Northwest Bay will be nothing but a mirage, therefore, for the sake of all this, I must wage war against the orcs. Chapter 662 Major Discovery. Marianne disagreed with Paul's words. She stood up and looked at him with a scrutinizing gaze. My child, you are too young, your father died too early, causing you to inherit the land prematurely, resulting in an arrogant personality. Her tone wasn't reproachful, but rather contained concern. You have no idea how vast this world is, nor what kind of forces exist elsewhere. A hint of sadness lingered in her voice. All right, I'll be frank. The Orcish invasion is part of the Arcane Society's plan, and I hope you won't stand against them. Paul was silent for a moment, fiddling with his knife and fork, before finally saying, if the Arcane Society's plan requires the Alder to pay the price, then I will have no choice but to oppose them. Marianne found it somewhat amusing. I can't help but suspect that Princess Catherine is also a hidden witch who has bewitched my son. I've lived in the Northwest Bay for so many years, could there really be a lord here so loyal to the royal family? You know, even your father was only, Paul interrupted her, mother, Aldo is Aldo, and the royal family is the royal family, they can't be confused, Mariana said anxiously, don't you know how dangerous this is? Think more about your father, think more about the Griles family. Nathan, who was engrossed in his meal, suddenly said, well, judging by his stubborn nature, I'm sure he's your son too. Mariana snapped at him, shut up. Nathan shrugged and continued eating. Ahem. Butler Philip entered the dining room. He overheard the family arguing and cautiously asked Paul, Your Excellency, Mr. Wells, Mr. Tennyson, and Vice President Anderson wish to see you. I told them you were having breakfast, but they seem very anxious and asked me to come and inform you. Paul was puzzled. Wells and Tennyson are understandable, but how did Anderson end up with them? The butler replied, they probably didn't come together, they just happened to bump into each other. Paul thought for a moment and instructed, they probably haven't eaten yet, set out 3 more sets of cutlery. When they heard the Earl invite them to breakfast, Anderson, Wells, and Tennyson were delighted and hurried to the dining room. They found other people present, a stunningly beautiful red-haired lady and a young man about the same age as the Earl. Perhaps a relative of the Earl was visiting? Because the young man's appearance bore a resemblance to Earl Griles. Please sit down, gentlemen, thank you. The 3 sat down at the table. Paul said expectantly, you've come in such a hurry, you must have made some amazing discovery, a great discovery, absolutely amazing, era-breaking. The 3 of them simultaneously stood up excitedly, then looked at each other awkwardly. Calm down, Paul smiled and invited them to sit down, then turned to Marianne and Nathan, saying, these 3 are all scholars, diligently exploring the path of science. I think you'll also be interested in spending some time learning about other fields. Actually, Paul had considered avoiding them. After all, Tennyson and Anderson's research areas were quite important to his upcoming plans, and his mother and brother were both members of the Mystic Order. But Marianne's disdain for him, though it stemmed from a mother's concern for her children, hurt Paul. He felt he needed to put on a show, to give the 2 sorcerers a little scientific shock. These 2 are my relatives. Paul ultimately didn't reveal Marianne and Nathan's true identities. Who shall begin by introducing their discovery? Wells and Tennyson? Or you, father, please, Mr. Wells and Mr. Tennyson, go first, Anderson said, displaying the humility expected of a clergyman. Well, haha, then we won't stand on ceremony, father, Wells said, beaming. Tennyson, you go ahead, it's all you're doing. Yes, teacher. Tennyson struggled to suppress his excitement, his voice trembling slightly. Lord Gleman, we have finally discovered a crucial factor in steel smelting. Oh, Paul's eyes lit up with excitement. Tennyson stated confidently, once we grasp this key factor, we will be able to mass-produce steel. Wait, Mariana abruptly stood up and shouted, interrupting Tennyson. Everyone looked at the beautiful woman with puzzled expressions. If it were the Mariana of the past, focused only on magic, she wouldn't have been interested in Tennyson's words at all. However, over the years, as a member of the Mystic Order, she had been deeply involved in the operation of the Gabella Empire, and thus gradually accumulated a considerable amount of knowledge in other areas. For example, what are the important things for a country? Large-scale steel production? This was an issue that could make any ruler jump off the throne. She gave Paul a reproachful look. This kid was too oblivious. Shouldn't such an important matter be discussed in private, where no one else was around? Paul asked curiously, what's wrong? Mariana didn't answer him, but looked at her youngest son. "You go out first." Nathan pointed to himself, asking inexplicably, "Me?" "Yes, okay." Nathan shrugged and walked out of the dining room dejectedly. Mariana sat down again. She had finally succumbed to her curiosity. She said with dissatisfaction, "I think a qualified lord should know the importance of keeping secrets, even to close relatives." "Oh, you're right." Paul was genuinely moved. This woman, his mother, was ultimately protecting him. Well, he had indeed acted somewhat impulsively just now because of his pride. Although he planned to only discuss principles with Tennyson and the others, stopping immediately once specific technical details were involved. For some early technologies, it was just a matter of understanding the underlying principles. Once those principles were broken, everything became clear. He said with a grin, "I don't think you'd spread this around." Marianne rolled her eyes at him. Paul said, "Please continue, Mr. Tennyson." Marianne's words made Tennyson wary. As someone who had personally experienced it, he knew the profound significance of his research. So he began to carefully consider his words. "Count, we conducted countless experiments and finally, under the influence of light, unveiled the true nature of so-called phlogiston, carbon. This is the crucial element we discovered." Chapter 663 The Truth About Steel and the Law of Heredity. Carbon. Paul looked on with exaggerated curiosity. Tennyson came over to Paul and placed a stack of papers on the table. Paul quickly scanned them. They were covered in dense text, detailing the alchemist's experiments. What moved him was that the paper already showed glimpses of laboratory science, with new methods such as controlled variables and comparative experiments taking shape. "We've conducted countless experiments and can finally confirm that your suspicions about phlogiston are correct. In reality, no phlogiston escapes during the calcination of metal. Rather, certain substances in the air combine with the metal, making the metal ash heavier." Tennyson pointed to the paper, explaining each section to Paul. "We'll call this substance oxygen for now, but it's still not the key to turning iron into steel, so we focus on the auxiliary material used in steel making, charcoal powder. In the process of turning iron into steel, something in the charcoal changes the properties of the metal, so we continue our experiments." Tennyson spoke at breakneck speed, forcing Paul to listen intently. "We also studied other substances, such as coal and diamond. This cost a lot of money, and we burned them with the high temperatures generated by convex lenses. The gases produced, when mixed with lime water, produced the same phenomenon. Ultimately, we concluded that these things, including charcoal, contain a common element, a form that cannot be broken down into other substances. With your vast knowledge, you can easily understand what this means, or rather, the element, we'll call it carbon. Carbon is the key factor in the transformation from iron to steel." Tennyson, abandoning his earlier restraint, excitedly waved his arms. "Great Earl Giles, in the process, we even overturned the phlogiston theory. This will surely go down in history. And it all started with your previous skepticism about phlogiston." Paul stopped him from flattering him. "If possible, please focus on the research itself." "Oh, of course." Tennyson regained some composure, but his face was still flushed. "In conclusion, Earl Gleman, as long as we control the carbon content in metals, we can produce steel with all sorts of different properties." Paul nodded with satisfaction. "With this theoretical guidance, we can find, or rather summarize, a large-scale, rapid steel smelting process, instead of having craftsmen laboriously hammering away with huge iron hammers." "That's right, Earl Gleman. We already have an ironworks. Presumably, we can quickly build a steel mill on that foundation." Wells joined the discussion, his eyes shining. He had also contributed greatly to the experiment, but didn't want to steal the spotlight from his students. Tisk, unbelievable. Exquisite and expensive diamonds are actually related to black coal. Perhaps we can find a way to directly synthesize diamonds artificially in the future. That would definitely make us rich. Just thinking about it is exciting." The three of them were very engrossed in their discussion, while Mariana, standing to the side, was somewhat surprised. Large-scale steel smelting? She envisioned thousands of knights in plate armor galloping on horseback. But it was only a fleeting thought. She didn't believe her son could actually find such a method. Who knew if those two alchemists were just spouting nonsense? Mariana hadn't understood much of what they just said. The witch saw something that surprised her. Paul's eyes were actually moist. Just because of those two alchemists rambling? A sudden surge of annoyance rose in her heart. Her son hadn't even had a tear after learning her identity. Smack. What she didn't know was that Paul's emotion wasn't due to the conclusion itself, but rather the process by which Tennyson and the others arrived at that conclusion. The alchemists had begun to search for a reasonable explanation step by step, based on detailed data, meticulous logic, and self-consistent calculations, instead of relying on their previous wild speculations. He slammed his hand heavily on the table, excitedly saying, "Tennyson, your family is free again, starting today." Tennyson immediately stood up from his chair and then knelt on one knee. "Thank you, esteemed Earl Gleman, it's your due." Paul smiled and gestured. "Please sit down, and let's hear what surprises Dean Anderson has in store for us." "Your Excellency, gentlemen, it is an honor to present my findings to you here." Anderson also laid out a stack of papers for Paul to review. His tone softened considerably during his presentation. "For some time now, I have been studying plants, focusing on the phenotypic relationships between generations. We know that children's appearances always carry some characteristics of their parents, cows, horses, and even various plants. The next generation is always influenced by the previous one. I call this phenomenon heredity, and my research aims to understand the laws governing heredity. At Earl Gleman's suggestion, I chose peas as my experimental subjects, and this suggestion has proven extremely useful. Through tireless efforts, I have reached the following conclusion: there is something I call hereditary factors that controls the traits of organisms. Hereditary factors come from both parents and can be dominant or recessive. Anderson spoke eloquently and calmly, detailing his experimental process and the conclusions he had reached. Paul listened and found nothing wrong with it. What Anderson said basically aligned with Mendel's theories. Differentiating appearance, selecting purebreds, the law of dominance, the law of segregation, the law of independent assortment, and so on. Of course, considering the later developments in genetics, there must be errors within these findings, but such discoveries are already incredibly valuable in this world. I think these conclusions can explain why the world's organisms are so diverse. Furthermore, I've discovered a major problem that has always existed in human society." Anderson's expression became serious. "The union between siblings is forbidden by our social ethics. It seems our ancestors discovered that such unions are highly likely to produce problematic offspring. I think this explains it now. The closer the blood ties, the greater the likelihood that they carry the same undesirable genetic factors. When two undesirable genetic factors combine, the traits they control will inevitably manifest as harmful. However, our ethics have a loophole. They only prohibit unions between paternal relatives, ignoring the maternal side. Now it seems that genetic factors come from both parents, so not only are first cousins forbidden, but also direct unions between cousins of the same maternal lineage. I request that you immediately issue a decree to prohibit this phenomenon and inform the rest of the kingdom of our new discovery." Paul nodded emphatically. "That's not even a question. I will certainly accept your suggestion. This is called eugenics. I will immediately order the council to draft a new decree." He stood up, full of confidence. "Anderson, your discovery is very important. Perhaps we can use the patterns you summarized to do something very meaningful. For example, in crop cultivation and livestock reproduction, especially in the event of war with the orcs. I've forgotten most of my chemistry and biology, so this is just a rough draft. Please forgive any errors." Chapter 664 The King's Decision. Dean Anderson and the two chemists took their leave. Mariana said worriedly, "Paul, I hope you can calm down. The birth of one or two new technologies won't change anything. The power you wield is far too small." Paul retorted sharply, "Oh, that means it's still too little. Once the quantitative change accumulates to a certain level, a qualitative change will occur." Unable to persuade her son, Mariana felt conflicted. She stared at Paul, her tone somewhat harsh. "Fine, then you can test your abilities in this orc crisis. As your mother, I have only one request: don't put yourself in danger. I've always valued my life," Paul replied with a smile. Mariana was silent for a moment. "In that case, tomorrow, no, the day after tomorrow, your brother and I will set off." Her voice was tinged with sadness. "So soon?" Paul was somewhat surprised. "We have very important things to do." "All right, you're always welcome here." In a sense, they were now on opposing sides, and the atmosphere between them was somewhat awkward. But Paul had no time for domestic squabbles. He needed to focus his energy on the orcs. Mariana, aside from worrying about her son's safety, wasn't entirely opposed to Paul's choice deep down. She was even somewhat proud of the courage and decisiveness he displayed. Ultimately, The orcs' attack on the Alder wasn't part of the Arcane Council's plan. It was merely a deal to ensure the royal tent wouldn't continue harassing Gabella's northern sphere of influence, for the foreseeable future, of course. No one was naive enough to believe the orcs wouldn't be tempted by such a close-knit prize. The Empire needed this time to recover from the chaos of the succession struggle. A message from the Northwest Bay shocked the Alder court. The orcs were attacking the kingdom's northeast. Upon opening the letter, the king's hand trembled slightly. Rodney's VIE held the thin letter, its contents personally written by his future brother-in-law, Paul Gleman. No joke, its accuracy beyond question. It was truly a case of misfortune never coming singly. The rebellious ministers of the south were eyeing the kingdom covetously, and now orcs were arriving from the north. The kingdom's higher-ranking officials were quickly summoned to the palace. "This is impossible," exclaimed the king's brother, Yuriko. "The orcs can only enter the kingdom by conquering Watcher's fortress, and Watcher's fortress is impregnable." "There is no impregnable fortress," said Lord Mayor Rupert, his face grim. "Besides, in the great mountains of the north, you mean those stubborn dwarves, as hard as stone? They couldn't possibly cooperate with the orcs. Furthermore, we have fortresses specifically monitoring them within the northeastern corridor." As high-ranking officials of the kingdom's government, many were aware of the alien races hiding in the northern mountains. Count Giles said he learned this information from merchants. "Is such a source reliable?" "I think it's reliable. Merchants are often the most sensitive to such matters," the crowd murmured amongst themselves. Prince Jassim, the king's father, suddenly spoke up. "We must not be complacent under any circumstances." He stood up and bowed slightly to his son. "Your Majesty," he said, "I suggest sending an experienced general to garrison the northeastern corridor, consolidate the military resources there, and defend against the orcs with all our might." Rodney's VIE stroked his chin. "I agree. Who do you think should be sent?" Prince Jassim seized the opportunity to suggest, "If not Catherine, then let her go. Her royal status can effectively restrain those unruly warlords." The Chamberlain, Rupert, shook his head. "I object. Princess Catherine has only recently become engaged." Prince Jassim looked at his niece. "Catherine, what do you think?" At this, everyone looked at Catherine. Since her engagement to Earl Greyman, the princess had rarely offered her opinions. She slowly stood up. "In the face of national crisis, my personal life is insignificant. If your Majesty appoints me to defend against the orcs, I am willing to accept this mission." Everyone awaited the king's decision. After a long pause, Rodney slowly said, "In that case, I will send Catherine to garrison the northeast corridor." Prince Jassim nodded in satisfaction, but his son immediately added, "Take her troops with her." The prince's face immediately filled with astonishment. Her troops, not only him, but everyone was surprised. Including Catherine. She had thought she would go alone. "Yes," the king nodded in confirmation. "I have always heard that the orc cavalry is very powerful. I think we should have an elite mounted force to counterbalance the orc cavalry, and Catherine's knights are the best choice." Rupert's furrowed brows relaxed, while a hint of displeasure flashed across Prince Jassim's face, but he quickly regained his composure. But, Yuriko said somewhat flusteredly, "that is the most elite force of Crystal Radiance. What if Giles in the south suddenly attacks if they leave?" His father had promised that he would take over this army after Catherine left. King Rodney's VIE, brimming with confidence, declared, "Don't worry, we'll soon have a powerful army to protect Crystal Radiance." The king again held up the letter written by Earl Greyman. "Besides the warning of the Orcish invasion, my dear brother-in-law has brought me good news. The first batch of military scrip has been successfully printed and shipped. It's currently heading south along the kingdom's west coast and will arrive in Crystal Radiance in less than a month. With military scrip, we can recruit a large number of soldiers and build a powerful army." Hearing this good news, the long-standing gloom in everyone's hearts finally dissipated. For a long time, insufficient military funds had been a major concern for the kingdom's government, until Earl Greyman proposed his so-called military scrip, using thin paper to replace precious gold and silver. At first, everyone thought it was an utterly idiotic idea, but after Earl Greyman explained his somewhat complex theory at the royal meeting, everyone surprisingly felt it had a tiny bit of feasibility. After all, the finances weren't already in such a state, why not give it a try? "I initially planned to establish an army of up to 50,000 men, a standing army, ready to be summoned and fight," Rodney's VIE announced ambitiously to his ministers. "Of course, for the time being, we can adopt a semi-organized structure, just like Earl Gleman's army." "Sorry, I haven't been feeling well these past few days. Chapter 665 The Arrival of the Orcs. Watcher's Fortress. A north wind howled, dark clouds filled the sky. The air was thick with the oppressive weight of the densely packed Orcish army. Yesterday, the fortress received warnings from scouts that the Orcish army was approaching. This morning, just as the sun rose, the dark mass of orcs surged from the depths of the distant plains. Among them were not only their own cavalry but also infantry phalanxes from the human vassal states they had conquered. These human vassals carried advanced siege weaponry, ladders, cedars, battering rams, catapults, ballistae. Everything was readily available. Atop the fortress, Legion Commander Duke Morton frowned deeply. Upon receiving news of the peace negotiations between the orcs and the Gaberans, he realized the orcs' attention would turn westward. Warki Fabar's ambitions for the human world would not be limited to a few small oasis kingdoms in the desert. The vast plains and forests were his true objective. Knight Arthur rushed over. "My lord. There are 2 letters for you. One is from an Orcish envoy, and the other is from Earl Gleman of the Northwest Bay." Duke Morton took them, first opening the Orcish letter and quickly skimming through the text. He recognized it as a letter written by Abar himself, showing how much he valued him. The High Chieftain was fluent in several human languages, including Alder. As the commander of Watcher's Fortress, he inevitably had to deal with this king of the grasslands, and the two were familiar with each other's handwriting. "What did the orc say? He advised us to surrender." Arthur was furious. "This is clearly an insult to us," but then he asked with some concern, What do you think?" Duke Morton gave a wry smile. Abar had written him several similar letters, some threatening, some enticing. "What are you thinking? Have the Orcish envoy take a message back, 'My life is the Duke of Alder's.'" Arthur breathed a sigh of relief. "As for this one," Duke Morton opened the letter from the Northwest Bay. "I don't think I know any Earl Grayman." Arthur scratched his head. "I do feel like I've heard that name somewhere before." Right," he suddenly realized, recalling an old story. "A few years ago, when Sir Duke and I went to the Northwest Bay, we met an Earl Grayman. This must be him." "Really?" Duke Morton finished reading the letter, his face showing surprise. "He actually warned us that the orcs were about to attack." "How did this Earl, so far away in the Northwest Bay, know?" "Of course." Duke Morton didn't have time to think about it now. The orc attack was imminent. If only this letter had arrived a little earlier. Arthur turned to find the orc envoy to deliver the message, and just as he left, Sir Duke, the fortress's deputy commander, approached. Morton sighed. "Judging from your expression, it seems you haven't brought back the result I wanted." Sir Duke nodded sadly. "The lords gave me some soldiers, but they were either old, weak, sick, or criminals. Alice, something is never as good as nothing. Hopefully, they can prove their worth as ordnance in battle." Woo! A muffled horn sounded in the distance, and the Orcish army began to move, slowly approaching the fortress. The attack was about to begin. Northwatch Keep, a town in the northern part of the Narradain corridor. At the city gate, 2 knights halted their horses, looking north. The towering Rocky Mountains lay like a giant dragon. And the people they were waiting for would come from the mountains. "Are we really going to do this?" Longfellow hesitated, looking at his companion. Boyle shook his head. "It's not us who want to do this, it's Grand Duke Bradley who wants to do this. It's dishonorable. To carry out one's lord's orders is a knight's greatest honor." The two argued about their mission, to welcome the Orcish army into the Narradain corridor. This was personally instructed by their lord, Grand Duke Bradley. Inspired by Giles and Veblen, Grand Duke Bradley, enfeoffed in the northeast of the kingdom, also harbored different thoughts. However, his strength was no match for the former two, not to mention the watchdog legion loyal to Crystal Radiant stationed right under his nose. Seeking external help became Grand Duke Bradley's choice, and the royal court on the plains extended an olive branch at the opportune moment. In fact, the Grand Duke's family had long since forged friendships with the plains forces. Under the cover of the Bradley family, large quantities of goods controlled by the kingdom were continuously transported to the plains, bringing back fine horses, gold, silver, and other precious items, all of which were pocketed by the Bradley family. This cooperation had continued for generations. There here, in the distance, an army bearing unfamiliar banners gradually came into view. Orcs. So many people. An entire army, Ferrandro exclaimed, both shocked and bewildered. Unbelievable. How did they manage to cross the northern mountains? I bet there are easy passageways through the Rocky Mountains that the orcs found, Boyle said, still shaken. Thinking about it now sends chills down my spine. The existence of these passageways makes Watcher's Fortress a joke. We were constantly under the threat of the orcs. Luckily, we're allies, Ferrandro asked bitterly. Before their main force arrived, small groups of orcs had been ravaging the northern villages for a long time. The army drew closer, and Ferrandro and Boyle recognized the orcs. They resembled humans, but were tall and powerful, with fierce eyes. In the sunlight, a fine layer of down was visible on their exposed skin. The two spurred their horses forward and awkwardly gave a knightly salute. The orc leader was exceptionally tall, even among orcs. He returned the greeting with practiced decorum, saying in a deep voice, "Human, we have come for the sake of friendship with Bradley." Ferrandro found it somewhat ironic, and his lips twitched. Boyle first introduced himself, then inquired about the orc chieftain's name. "Callum, welcome, but the plan has changed slightly. My lord wishes you to remain here and not proceed towards Watcher's Fortress for the time being." Callum's eyes widened. "Our people are fighting a bloody battle, I cannot linger here, but," Ferrandro explained, "Crystal Radiance has sent an army to support us, led personally by Princess Catherine." "Oh? Princess Catherine? I've heard of her. Does the Grand Duke want us to annihilate this army on the way? It's better than letting them successfully join up with the Watcher's Legion, isn't it?" "But, regarding that princess, the Grand Duke wishes that she not be harmed and that she be kept unharmed." Callum laughed heartily. "You've rebelled, and you're still worried about this? I can only promise not to harm her proactively. If she commits suicide, that's none of my business." Boyle smiled awkwardly. The real reason was, the Bradley family wanted a descendant with royal blood. He changed the subject. "Chief Callum, you certainly have guts, bringing your army here personally without even sending a vanguard to scout ahead." But the other man scoffed. "My lads have long since memorized every blade of grass and every tree here." Boyle was speechless. Indeed, with their lord's indulgence, small Orcish armies had already begun large-scale operations in northern Narradin. Chapter 666 Loisland. Watcher's Keep is not a solitary structure. Besides the main keep, positioned at the eastern exit of the Narradin corridor, numerous towns and villages are scattered behind it, along the eastern section of the corridor. These towns and villages provide the Legion with a degree of self-sufficiency. The entire keep area could even be considered a small earldom. Watcher's Keep now faces a very serious crisis. Not from the front, though a tidal wave of Orcish armies has surged forth, the main keep remains unconquered. The real crisis comes from the rear. Father in heaven. You, Sir L.A., the commander responsible for guarding the western side of the keep area, trembled violently. Not from fear, but from rage. He stood with his back against the wall, his eyes seeming to spit fire. The Bradley family will be nailed to the pillar of shame in the kingdom's history, to be judged by posterity. The victors will not be judged. Standing opposite him was General Gresham of the Bradley family, watching him with a cold smile. Not long ago, the Bradley family's army arrived at the fortress guarded by Surlia, one of the entrances to the fortress area. They claimed they needed to deliver supplies and troops to the Watcher's Legion. Surlia, of course, let them pass without hesitation. The front lines desperately needed reinforcements, and even he had been reduced to only a few dozen men. However, the Bradley family's army immediately attacked upon entering, quickly seizing control of the entire fortress due to their superior numbers. His poor men were either killed or captured. "Surlia, I'll give you one more chance. Do you decide to pledge allegiance to the great Duke Bradley?" Surlia spat in the other's face. That's not a good thing. You're a nobleman, after all." Gresham wiped his face and then waved his hand. Thud. Two spears pierced the knight's abdomen from either side, pinning him to the wall. "You sons of bitches." Ira Eyes coughed up his last breath. "Alder will send you all to hell." Gresham remained expressionless. "The kingdom's very existence is still uncertain, Your Highness. The land of Yellow Earth lies ahead. We are about to enter the kingdom's northeastern region," the scout knight reported to Catherine. "I know. We'll continue after a short rest." Catherine, mounted on her horse, looked up and saw many generals surrounding her, Offina, Klein, Lester, Dempsey. She took a telescope from a servant. This tool was a gift from Paul, capable of cleverly refracting light through a lens to magnify distant scenes. Catherine almost immediately fell in love with this exquisite little gadget. For a general, Its usefulness was immense. In fact, when she first encountered the telescope, she thought it was some kind of magical artifact and even repeatedly tested it with a magic detecting stone. Catherine raised the telescope, and a scene completely different from the south came into view. It was a landscape of rugged terrain, riddled with ravines and fragmented features. The soil was deep, the topography complex, and the vegetation sparse, with vast expanses of yellow or dark red earth. It was precisely because of the soil's color that it was called the Lowest Land. Klein said, "After a while, the Bradley family should come to meet us." Catherine nodded. Half a month ago, she had led her army from Crystal Radiance, 5,000 cavalry and 5,000 infantry, galloping tirelessly towards Watcher's fortress. Now, they had finally covered more than half the distance. Just then, the sound of rapid hoofbeats came from afar. Often I looked and recognized him. "It seems to be Paul, our messenger." The messenger rode up to Catherine. He too was a knight. "Your Highness, I saw the army from afar. I didn't expect it to really be you. We met you halfway there. I thought we wouldn't find you until we reached Nereden." Catherine recognized him, a slight ripple of emotion stirring within her. Did the Earl reply? "Yes, this is Lord Gleman's reply. Please keep it safe." Paul took out an envelope and handed it to Catherine with both hands. He praised excitedly, as expected of the so-called telegraph, "It's indeed as fast as lightning. I sent your message that morning, and received a response from Lacquer Town that afternoon." Paul was referring to the flag signaling system from the Northwest Bay. Back in Crystal Radiance, Eileen had repeatedly urged him, in front of the king, to build the signal station from the Northwest Bay all the way south to the capital, Crystal Radiance, to improve communication speed between the two places and along the way. Paul naturally had no objection to this proposal. An efficient communication line with the densely populated south would be of great importance to the commercial development of the Northwest Bay. King Rodney's VIE also had a very strong interest in this so-called telegraph, having witnessed its power before in the Northwest Bay. Considering that contact with the Northwest Bay would increase, the king made the decision without much hesitation. The plan was this: Alda would send men to Jingayo, and both sides would simultaneously build signal towers facing each other, one heading south and the other north. The locations were quickly chosen, passing through prosperous major towns. Of course, this wouldn't be completed in a short time. So far, the two sides hadn't connected, but they could build and use them as needed, and each section was already operational. After Catherine led her troops out, considering her engagement to Paul, she felt she should let him know her movements, so she sent someone to the southernmost point of the northern section of the line to send Paul a telegram. The speed of the reply greatly surprised Catherine. She immediately opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. It contained only a few sentences. Although the telegraph system was fast, it couldn't carry much information. The sender had to rack their brains to compress the information into a few words or even abbreviations, otherwise, the operators along the route might be exhausted. Her fiancé's reply didn't even include a greeting. He only said he would try his best to help Catherine, including sending troops. He also suggested that for their next correspondence, Catherine could send someone to Duke Ferdinand's territory, the easternmost point of the Northwest Bay, where a signal station had been built after several years of development. "This is my first exchange of letters with my future husband, and it's in such a cold and impersonal way," Catherine thought with a touch of regret, but still carefully folded the letter and placed it in the envelope. She looked again at the yellow earth to the northeast and flicked her whip. Let's continue. Chapter 667 Insolent Remarks. In the reception room of the Lord's Manor in Lacquertown, apart from Earl Myron Garnard, who was serving in the capital, the lords of the Northwest Bay Customs Union were all gathered. They were about to discuss a serious issue: how to deal with the Orcish invasion. "Damn steppe barbarians, hairy bastards, a bunch of overconfident fools." Such curses filled the room. "This is still unbelievable." Earl Heller shook his head. "Watchman's fortress is impregnable. Theoretically, the orcs couldn't possibly have breached the Nereden corridor, although reason told him that Paul was unlikely to have gathered everyone here based solely on a rumor. "It's regrettable," Paul said dejectedly. "The intelligence agents in Arda have reported back that there are signs of large-scale orc activity in northern Nereden, near the Rocky Mountains." Earl Parker frowned. "If Watchman's fortress is still standing, does that mean the orcs have found a large-scale route across the mountains?" Paul nodded. "I think so." Their conversation sparked another round of discussion. "All right. We should prepare," Duke Ferdinand rubbed his hands together, somewhat nervously. Thanks to the booming commerce, the lords of the Northwest Bay now had many channels of information, unlike the lords in other parts of the kingdom who were largely oblivious. They had some knowledge of what was happening on the Great Plains, the newly risen royal tent, the great chieftain named Abar, and the Orcish armies that had swept through the oasis kingdoms to the east of the kingdom. The Ferdinand family's territory was located inland, at the easternmost part of the Northwest Bay. If something went wrong in the northeast of the kingdom, his territory would be the first to suffer. The eastern towns should be fortified, dig deep trenches, train the army. A whole host of standard measures were proposed and quickly approved. But then, complaints began to surface. Those damned orcs. Training a large army will severely impact our production. Exactly. Who will farm? Who will work in the factories? But the orc cavalry are swift as the wind. We have to deploy troops everywhere, requiring a huge manpower. Paul stood up and patted his chest. Gentlemen, I called you here to boost your confidence. Two attendants carried a wooden frame and placed it behind Paul. The frame resembled a drawing board, with a stack of large cardboard sheets hanging on it, which could be flipped through one by one. What's this? A manual PowerPoint presentation. Don't worry about the name, we should focus on the content. Paul flipped open the cardboard. The first page depicted a strange machine spewing thick mist, Mayonne, an ordinary small town in the northeastern part of the kingdom. It was here that the Bradley family welcomed Princess Catherine and her army. Your Highness. A salute to you, a salute to the great Alder royal family. Smollett Bradley, the second son of the Duke of Bradley, knelt respectfully on one knee, bowing to the princess of the kingdom. Rise, Sir Smollett. Catherine smiled gently, yet with unwavering dignity. Smollett rose, looking at her with eager eyes. It has been a long time since I last saw your beautiful face, since I fought under your command against the Highland barbarians, Catherine said. It is a pity that you did not attend the king's coronation last time, Smollett sighed. Yes, I was entrusted with important duties by my father and had no time to go south. However, my brother brought me a bolt from the blue. Our king has betrothed his cousin to Count Arda. Catherine's expression remained unchanged. This is the inevitable course of action for every royal daughter. We share the glory of the kingdom, and naturally we must fulfill our obligations to it, but, the man opposite her shook his head. Perhaps the king should choose a husband for you of higher birth, purer blood, and a more illustrious family, so that he may be worthy of your beauty and talent, rather than simply sending you to some man's bed. How dare you? The generals around Catherine were furious. How dare this well-dressed young nobleman speak so recklessly? Offina, Lester, and Offina all drew their swords, glaring angrily at Smollett. To be honest, this was the first time they had encountered someone so disrespectful to the princess. The knights behind Smollett immediately drew their swords as well, protecting their lord's second son. The sound of swords being drawn filled the air, and tensions were high. Catherine was so angry that she was momentarily speechless, as she too had never encountered such a situation before. Earl Smollett, my future husband is a healthy, noble, and brave nobleman, she added a question mark in her mind, as she didn't yet know Paul well enough. But in public, she had to defend him. He is a perfect match for me, and I am very grateful to His Majesty the King for facilitating our union. A look of regret appeared on Smollett's face. He waved his hand, and the knights behind him sheathed their swords. He then bowed deeply. I apologize, Your Highness Catherine. I admit I was blinded by intense resentment, but I believe there are many others in the kingdom who share my feelings, simply bound by so-called face, too embarrassed to speak out in your presence. These words, laced with hidden flattery, coupled with Smollett's expression, made him appear as a lovesick young man tormented by unrequited love. Catherine waved her hand, signaling her men to sheathe their swords. But her tone turned cold, becoming more icy than before. Sir, considering your youth, I will not pursue your rudeness, the princess sighed. Her heart had already drifted to Watcher's fortress, and she had no interest in such trivial matters. My army needs to proceed to the fortress immediately. The soldiers at the front are awaiting our support. The Duke's second son seemed relieved. Of course, Your Highness. My father specifically sent me here to provide you with supplies and to act as your guide. Please rest in the town for a while. I will return to the camp immediately to hand over the supplies to your army. Catherine nodded. Go as soon as possible, sir. The orc army is pressing in. I hope you can focus your energy on protecting the kingdom's people and your family's territory, rather than indulging in idle thoughts. I will heed your advice. Smollett left with his knights. Not long after he left, Offina approached Catherine. "Your Highness, I have bad news." Suddenly, it dawned on me that, as a farming and conquest novel, the protagonist hadn't fought a formal battle in a long time. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 668: The Deteriorating Situation. A man who looked like a beggar was brought before Catherine. Catherine was taken aback. She could vaguely recognize him from his face as Becky Mondel, the second son of the Mondel family, a noble family in the capital. A year ago, he had accepted his family's arrangement to go to Watcher's Fortress for training to obtain his knighthood. In Catherine's memory, Becky was a strong young man who, like other young nobles in the capital, paid great attention to his appearance. But the man before her was vastly different from the Becky she remembered. He walked with a limp, looking exhausted, as if he had just finished a long journey. His cloudy eyes revealed the hardship of the trip, his clothes were tattered, his exposed skin was covered with red wounds, and his hair was a tangled mess, dirty and disheveled, blown about by the wind. "You're Becky Mondel?" Catherine asked incredulously. "Why, Your Highness, I never imagined I'd be alive to see my old friends from Crystal Radiance again, to see you alive. This must be a blessing from the Lord of Light." Becky burst into tears, nearly stumbling and falling, but thankfully Offina caught her. The black-haired female general comforted him. "Becky, you're surrounded by your own people now, you can rest assured. Explain the details to Her Highness." Becky Mondel composed himself and quickly described the terrible reality to Catherine. The Bradley family had betrayed the kingdom, and Watcher's Fortress had fallen. The fortress's front was under heavy attack by the Orcish army, which wasn't a big deal. We were confident we could repel them, just as we had done countless times before. However, our rear was subjected to a shameful sneak attack. The Bradley family's army, under the guise of supplying provisions, entered the fortress area. Worse still, it wasn't just the Bradley family's rebels coming from behind, there was also a large orc force. We simply don't understand how such a large orc force could appear behind us. Despite the Legion's valiant efforts, the main fortress finally succumbed. To preserve the last seed of the Watcher's Legion, Vice Commander Sir Duke ultimately ordered a breakout. Given that the west was Bradley family territory, we chose to break out south towards the Alton Plateau, which, at least nominally, was also Kingdom territory. My squad was ordered to cover the rear, but after a fierce battle, we became separated from the main force and lost our way in the wilderness. We traversed primeval jungles, crossed the Gobi Desert, and suffered constant losses until only I remained. Just as I was about to give up, the Lord of Light gave me my last breath, allowing me to see this town and the kingdom's flag flying above it. After saying this, Becky Mondel burst into tears. "Only me left. Only me left," he repeated over and over. Damn traitors. Anger burned in everyone's chest. The generals around Catherine gripped their swords tightly. Offina, suppressing her anger, asked her lord on behalf of the kingdom, "Your Highness, what should we do now?" The princess's golden eyebrows were tightly furrowed. From Mondel's words, it was clear that the situation in the northeast of the kingdom had deteriorated to an unbearable state. The most important gate had been lost, and the local lord had allied with the enemy coming from outside. Worse still, their own army was trapped deep in the traitors' territory, like a leaf in a raging storm. No wonder that Bradley brat dared to be so rude to me. A trap has been set for us. Catherine immediately summoned her generals to discuss the next steps. Retreat immediately. Retreat to territories loyal to the kingdom. What about Watcher's Fortress? Just leave it like that. The fortress has fallen. Given the dire situation, everyone quickly reached a consensus. Retreat was imperative. If the Bradley family planned this all along, we'll likely face many obstacles on our return journey. Catherine expressed her concern. Lester's eyes were cold. Then kill those traitors. Make them pay an unbearable price. Even their lives are worth it. No, no, no. Klein disagreed. Lester, you are a general commanding the kingdom's army, not a knight charging into battle. Dempsey nodded, saying, our responsibility is to preserve the kingdom's strength as much as possible when the situation is beyond saving. Klein spread a map on the table. Look, this is the area we are in. Based on my assessment, most of the Bradley family's forces should be focused on dealing with Watcher's Keep, while another portion is either nearby or lying in ambush along our southward retreat route. Therefore, I suggest, he gestured westward. Head west, to the Black Rock lands, yes, to the Black Rock lands. There, we'll gather forces loyal to the kingdom, Lester asked. Orcs are notorious for plundering. If they really invade the kingdom's heartland on a large scale, they might immediately attack the rich south to plunder its wealth. Klein continued, if we establish a considerable force in the Black Rock lands, it will seriously threaten the flank of the Orcish army, preventing them from fully committing to the south. And there's another important reason. He looked at Catherine. Further west of the Black Rock lands lies the Northwest Bay. As far as I know, the Northwest Bay now produces more than half of the kingdom's steel and weapons, true wealth in war. However, this region has long been relatively isolated, never having faced the test of large-scale warfare. We must build a barrier for the Northwest Bay in the Black Rock lands. Most southern nobles viewed orcs as a group of barbarians roaming the grasslands, tall and brave but undisciplined. They believed that a single charge from human soldiers could easily scatter them. However, most of the generals of the Royal Knights had experienced training at Watcher's Fortress and had a relatively accurate understanding of the Orcish army's strength, especially now that a new royal tent had been established on the plains. They needed to be more cautious in their assessment of the enemy. If Watcher's Fortress were still in the kingdom's hands, the situation would be better, but now this great fortress had fallen. Klein said, as long as the Northwest Bay completes its adaptation to war, I think with the support there, it's not impossible to push the orcs back directly from Black Rock Highlands. Offina nodded, then we must inform Earl Giles to prepare as soon as possible. Your Highness, what do you think? Everyone looked at Catherine, waiting for her to make a decision. The blonde princess quickly decided, we'll go to the Northwest Bay, but before that, we need to obtain some leverage against the Bradley family. Sorry for the delay. Chapter 669 Taking Hostages. Lemmer's lips curled into a slight smile. He couldn't suppress the surge of excitement within him. Riding his steed, humming a tune, a confident expression of certainty shone on his face. My lord, you seem to be in a very good mood, a servant flattered him. Of course, I'm on, Lemmer laughed heartily, brandishing his riding crop. I am about to infuse the Bradley family with noble royal blood. What a momentous event. A look of longing appeared on his face. If I can marry Princess Catherine, my chances of becoming the heir to the Bradley family will greatly increase. No. That position will surely be mine. If I give birth to a descendant with the royal blood, what right will my so-called brother have to compare with me? Surrounded by his trusted confidants, Lemmer was now completely uninhibited. The servant merely smiled. He had always known his lord's ambition. Lemmer was not content to be subordinate to his elder brother. He wanted to seize the highest power within the family. Unfortunately, as the second son, his power was far inferior to that of his brother, who was 10 years his senior. His father, Grand Duke Bradley, had always longed for a marriage alliance with the royal family. Having a descendant with Rodney blood would undoubtedly greatly enhance the legitimacy of the Bradley family's claim to the throne, although in normal times such an act would still be considered rebellion. Any ambitious person could see that this was an abnormal era. Sadly, this wish remained unfulfilled. The lack of a royal descendant did not deter Grand Duke Bradley's growing ambition. He remained determined to rebel with the help of the orcs. To his surprise, Princess Catherine personally led her army to the Yellow Earth. A golden opportunity. Was the Lord of Light finally granting his wish after years of piety? When the Grand Duke handed over the captured Catherine to Limus, the second son of the family was overjoyed. His father promised that if successful, he would marry the princess to him. Was his childhood dream finally about to be realized? Lemmer was grateful for his self-discipline in his daily life. He knew that this immense fortune had fallen upon him because his older brother had ruined his health through excessive indulgence in his youth. Unfortunately, his brother already had children, and his health wouldn't prevent him from inheriting their father's position. Therefore, he needed to perform even better to gain a higher status in his father's eyes. Of course, his father had more than just the two of them. He also had a younger brother, but he was just a little kid. With these mixed thoughts in mind, Lemmer led his caravan to the town of Mon once again. Heavy wagons drove towards the town, carrying genuine supplies. This was, after all, the outskirts of the region, and Lemmer's plan was to let the princess's army continue deeper into the Loess Plateau before making his move. At the entrance to the town, he saw a figure. A knight, and a dashing female knight at that. Her flowing black hair billowed in the wind, exuding a wild beauty, and her fair face was framed by deep, dark eyes that revealed determination and resolve. Lemmer recognized her, Duchess Offina, Princess Catherine's close friend and assistant. "Thank you for your hard work, sir." The knight's captivating voice stirred Lemmer's imagination. What should he do with her after he'd won her over? Perhaps he should bestow her upon an important subordinate to win him over? A noblewoman from the capital held immense appeal for the country bumpkins from the outer regions. Oh, no, no, no. Lemmer, looking at Offina's alluring figure, changed his mind. She was also a woman of beauty and elegance. How could he hand her over to those rude fellows? Perhaps he should take her as a concubine. Catherine shouldn't mind. After all, they were friends. Lemmer maintained a respectful demeanor, gesturing lightly with his whip towards the caravan entering the town. "This is the supply I am sending to Her Highness the Princess. Please inspect it." Offina smiled, ignoring Lemmer's scrutinizing gaze, and gestured for him to proceed. "The inspection isn't urgent. Her Highness has prepared a banquet, and everyone hopes to dine with you. Your Highness is too kind. It is my greatest honor." Lemster feigned an expression of extreme honor. "Please follow me." Offina smiled, spurred her horse, and the mount slowly made its way into the town. Lemster and his entourage followed closely behind. The town streets were very quiet. Offina explained, "Because the princess is here, we have asked the commoners to leave. The rules of the royal nobles are truly numerous." Lemster thought to himself, "Perhaps when I become king, I should also have such majesty. There should be a clear distinction between the upper and lower classes." Gradually, the group and the caravan arrived at the center of the town, where the church and town hall, among other public buildings, were located. Thump, thump, thump. A series of rapid hoofbeats suddenly rang out. Immediately, countless armored figures wielding weapons surged from all directions into the alleys. Something terrible was about to happen. Seeing this, Limmerist's head buzzed, and he froze on the spot. Taking advantage of Limmerist's brief moment of distraction and his men's panic, Offina spurred her horse away from them. "What does this mean?" "Your Highness. Your Highness," Limmerist finally snapped out of his daze and shouted. Clang. The Bradley family's servants drew their weapons, trapping Limmerist in the middle. "Catherine! Catherine!" Limmerist called out the princess's name directly. "HMPH. Limmerist, you still have the nerve to bark here." The eldest princess of the Aldo Kingdom, her face cold, arrived within Limmerist's sight, surrounded by numerous generals. The princess seemed too lazy to speak, while her subordinates couldn't help but hurl insults. Although Limmerist already guessed most of the reason in his heart, he still stubbornly refused to admit it. "Why is this happening?" "Your Highness, I need an explanation." Catherine's golden eyebrows furrowed tightly, and she finally said, "Did you think you had done everything perfectly? I never imagined that the prestigious Bradley family would become such a shameful traitor, and even collude with the orcs." She practically gritted her teeth as she said the last part, revealing the hatred in her heart. Chapter 670 Westward Retreat. "No. Your Highness Catherine, please let me explain." Limmerist panicked, knowing full well that the town was now filled with the kingdom's army. A tremendous fear gripped his heart, making his head spin. Catherine sneered. "I can give you a chance to explain, but you must lay down your weapons." Limmerist hesitated. His attendant immediately shouted, "Lay down your weapons and it's all over. We'll cover your charge outwards, sir." Perhaps there's still a chance. Yes. Perhaps there was still a chance. Limmerist immediately turned his horse and charged back out of the town, his attendants surrounding him. Whoosh! A series of whooshing sounds rang out as the kingdom's army fired crossbow bolts, several Bradley knights falling from their horses. The archers avoided Limmerist in the middle, focusing their fire only on the knights around him. The rain of crossbow bolts only stopped when Limmerist and his party collided with the kingdom's cavalry who had come to intercept them. The clash of armor and swords produced a deafening roar, startling the townspeople who had been peeking out of the buildings. They quickly retreated, slamming their windows shut. The Bradley knights fought valiantly, hoping to cover their lord's escape from the town, but armed only with light armor and swords, they were no match for the heavily armored and lance-wielding knights of the kingdom, and quickly found themselves on the verge of defeat. Just as they were about to break out of town, a flying rope snagged Limster in the fierce melee, yanking him from his horse and dragging him haphazardly across the ground. "Ah!" Limster screamed in agony as a horse's hoof trampled his sheen, the intense pain instantly shooting through his body. "Your Highness, we're so sorry, we almost killed this fellow by accident." The knights, escorting the second son of the Bradley family, reported to the princess with lingering fear. Seeing Limster writhing in pain, Catherine's anger eased slightly. This guy had been so disrespectful to her not long ago, she really wanted to stab him in the throat. But she held back. "Your Highness, I'm willing to confess everything to you. I only hope you can forgive my sins," the now trapped Limus pleaded humbly for his life. "Everything, yes, everything, my father's conspiracy, and his cooperation with the orcs, HMPH. You'll confess slowly on the way. Keep a close watch on him, don't let him escape, and don't let him die." Catherine's voice was icy cold. "Where are his servants? 3 are still alive, the rest are dead. The supply wagon, it's all genuine goods, and the people transporting them are just ordinary laborers. Prepare to retreat to Blackrock Plains immediately." "Yes, Your Highness." Catherine didn't hesitate for long and quickly issued the order to head west. There was reason to believe that the Bradley family had more than just a fool like Limus planted here. Knights of the kingdom's army galloped across the town, while the residents of Mon, hiding in their homes, watched in panic as the streets were shrouded in swirling dust. Many already knew a worrying fact: the kingdom's army, which had come from afar, had clashed with the Duke's forces, and there were dead. Did this mean the Yellow Earth was about to turn against the kingdom? Many were uneasy and prayed to the Lord of Light for protection of themselves and their families, for conflicts between local lords and kings often led to war. However, they were temporarily relieved that the kingdom's army seemed to have no intention of burning, killing, or looting within the town, a common punishment for rebellious territories. After forming ranks outside the town, they headed far west, in a valley somewhere. The orc General Callum squinted, looking up at the sun. Had this day already passed? When his gaze returned to the ground, he saw Longfellow returning on horseback. "Human," Callum called out to him. Farron turned his head helplessly. "What is it, General Callum?" "My warriors and I have wasted 2 days here." "When is that little wench you mentioned arriving?" The orc's voice was thick with annoyance. "We've already sent someone to contact young Master Limist. He's probably already leading his target on his way here. He's not far off, HMPH. That fellow Boyle said the same thing yesterday." "Spirit of the Steppes," the strong orc cried out in anguish. "Our other army has already stormed Watcher's fortress. They've achieved unparalleled feats, perhaps even beheading that old bastard Morton, and I, the mighty steppe warrior Callum, here guarding your master's woman-stealing duties. How absurd. I shouldn't have listened to your orders and gone straight to the fortress. Perhaps I would be the one with the greatest credit." Faced with the orc's incessant complaints, Franro calmly reminded him, "General Callum, the Royal Knights are a powerful force. I don't think you want to be attacked from behind while attacking the enemy." Callum glared. "Damn it. Can't you even delay them for a few days?" Just as their argument was about to escalate, a knight rushed in with a report. Seeing his panicked expression, both Franro and Callum felt a sense of foreboding. "I didn't encounter Lord Lemster on the road. When I arrived in Mayonne, the people there said he had been kidnapped by the kingdom's army." Damn it. The sudden turn of events caused Thorandro to curse under his breath. Just as he was pondering a countermeasure, Callum beside him asked in a deep voice, "The kingdom's army has entered the Yellow Earth?" Yes, since they've kidnapped your master." "Which direction did they go?" "West. Everyone in town says they went west." Thorandro frowned and asked, "General, what do you plan to do?" "Pursue them," Callum shouted, his voice filled with excitement. "Now that we know the kingdom's army's movements, of course we must catch up with them, defeat them, kill them. And rescue your master while we're at it." Ha 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 ha. He might have missed the attack on Watcher's fortress, but it was said that the Royal Knights were a more elite force than the Watcher Legion. If they could annihilate this army, the merit would be no less than attacking Watcher's fortress. In fact, Callum had targeted the Royal Knights from the beginning, otherwise, he wouldn't have agreed to Thorandro and his men ambushing them here. His earlier complaints stemmed mainly from his frustration at the lack of news from the enemy. Now, finally, there was a clear direction. Under his command, the troops lying in ambush in the valley began to stir. Chapter 671 Archival System and Political Censorship. Lakeside Town, Lord's Mansion. Earl Paul Gleman of Arda sat behind his desk, intently studying a thick booklet before him. It was, in fact, an execution list. The rebellion in Barber Village, after meticulous investigation and trial, had finally yielded preliminary results. The Lord's Court had rendered judgments on the crimes or potential offenses of each individual. The list before Paul was of those sentenced to death. It contained detailed information about each mortal, including name, gender, age, physical appearance, and their role in the rebellion. Chief Judge Thomas, noticing the Earl's slightly furrowed brow, felt a pang of worry. "My lord, you seem somewhat dissatisfied with this list," Paul sighed. "My impartial Chief Judge, I feel this list is rather too long." Thomas disagreed with the Earl's view. "This is already in accordance with your instructions, appropriately narrowing the scope of punishment. Even the collateral relatives of those traitors are not included." Paul shook his head in distress. "But I don't understand, even if they are the traitor's immediate family, is it necessary to execute those underage children as well?" Thomas, with a matter-of-fact expression, was about to refute his lord when he was interrupted by another voice. "Of course it is necessary." Paul's mother, Marianne Gleman, approached Paul with a serious expression. "If they are allowed to grow up, they will inherit the hatred of the previous generation, and there is a high chance that it will turn into a poison dagger stabbing you from the darkness." Marianne had originally come to say goodbye to Paul, but before she could utter her farewells, Chief Justice Thomas came to visit him. Not wanting to disturb her son's official business, she gave up her time and waited aside. Then she learned a terrible thing from their conversation that chilled her to the bone. Her eldest son had recently experienced a rebellion that could have threatened his life. So Marianne couldn't wait to ask for the details of the rebellion. "That damned Fergus, that damned bastard. What a hypocrite. Your father and I used to think he was an upright knight." Marianne cursed the former knight of the Griles family in a fit of rage. "Perhaps he thought he was practicing the uprightness of his time," Paul told Marianne. But now that the rebellion was quelled, Marianne's mood gradually calmed, until her son displayed what she considered unnecessary mercy. Marianne picked up the register in front of Paul and quickly flipped through it. "She's browsing so fast," Paul thought to himself, secretly surprised by his mother's movements. Marianne's eyes darted left and right, and the register in her hands flipped through the pages like a revolving lantern. If anyone else were doing this, one would doubt whether they were really looking. But Marianne was a witch, or rather, a sorceress. HMPH, Marianne slammed the register on the table after she finished reading. She looked at the chief judge with a cautious gaze. "Thomas, is this how you protect a traitor?" Thomas wasn't familiar with his former mistress. He had only been appointed chief judge of the Lord's Court by old Gleman many years after Mariana left the Northwest Bay, and before that, he hadn't frequented the Lord's mansion. But he vaguely remembered Mariana and knew she was a very shrewd woman. Faced with Mariana's stern gaze, the chief judge shrugged helplessly and looked at Paul for help. "Ahem. The Lord's Court is acting according to my orders." Paul helped the chief judge out of the predicament, diverting Mariana's attention to himself. "Of course I know." Mariana glared at her eldest son, her voice unconsciously rising. "You're appeasing your potential enemies. If it were any other lord, this list would be at least 3 or 4 times longer," Paul retorted. "I will show no mercy to those traitors who planned, participated, and have blood on their hands. But their unsuspecting relatives, especially the children, I feel there's absolutely no need to harm them." "No need? Do you think this is child's play? This is a life or death struggle." Mariana's tone was stern, much like the parents Paul used to discipline their underachieving children in his past life. Your mother, experienced a terrible rebellion while living in Gabella, a rebellion filled with intrigue and bloodshed." The rebellion Mariana referred to was naturally the palace coup in Gabella. In fact, she had not only experienced it, but was also one of the planners and executors of the rebellion. Naturally, Mariana also knew the consequences that might befall them if their side failed. The faction of the second Prince Antonio would be completely eradicated. The Arcane Society would be exposed, and its members would be hunted down. The Meester's Tower would be purged, even though its leader, Aldrich, was the Emperor's tutor. Antonio's friends and subordinates in the army, such as Siegfried, would be executed, or at least forced to commit suicide, even if they came from noble imperial families and had distinguished military achievements. Emperor Bartley Griffin, though known for his magnanimity and enlightenment, was not immune to change. Holding on to power was an instinct of every feudal monarch, and he would certainly not bestow magnanimity and enlightenment upon those who challenged his authority. Fortunately, her side was on the winning side. "Paul, those innocent children you speak of are the evil eggs laid by venomous snakes. When they grow up, they will disguise themselves, meticulously approach you, use sweet words to gain your trust, and then carry out their revenge plots without your knowledge. Therefore, the danger must be nipped in the bud." So, Paul gestured to his mother, indicating she didn't need to continue. "I plan to establish a lifelong record system." "A lifelong record system?" Thomas and Marianne were taken aback. They had never heard of such a thing. Paul explained to them, it's a complete record of a person's life, from birth. Every major event in their life, such as serious mistakes and major achievements, will be recorded. Even if they move from one place to another, their file will move with them and be managed by the local government. For those who want to get close to me or entrust important responsibilities, a political vetting process will be conducted, based on their file. Only those who have no criminal record, or whose immediate family members for 3 generations, can pass the vetting. You see, wouldn't this eliminate dangerous individuals as much as possible? It seemed like a solution, but Marianne and Thomas both felt it was somewhat idealistic. Chapter 672 Development Plan. Marianne shook her head, saying, "Are you crazy? There are so many people in this world, how could you possibly record their entire lives?" Paul retorted, "Please don't exaggerate. I'm simply creating files for the people under my rule." "Marianne, you don't even know how many people are in your own territory." Paul chuckled, "You're mistaken. As of last December, Arda had a total of 536,873 people, of whom." He explained Arda's population situation in detail, categorizing it into different aspects. Marianne's eyes widened in astonishment. You mean you've recorded every single person in your territory, the precise population figures, down to the single digit?" Truly surprised Marianne. "Yes, I've surveyed them all, and it's all recorded," Paul replied with great pride. Registering the population was a crucial task of the previously established Survey and Statistics Committee, but this work had now been transferred to the Ministry of Civil Affairs of the State Council. He was certain that no other lord in the world could possess such a detailed understanding of his subjects. Marianne couldn't understand why Paul was going to such lengths. Did her son have an almost obsessive need for control? She sighed. "No one has ever done this before. There will inevitably be many problems," Paul said resolutely. "No system is perfect at the beginning. Someone has to take the first step." At this moment, Chief Justice Thomas, who had been silent, spoke up. "My lord, creating a file for everyone is a massive undertaking. It will undoubtedly increase administrative costs." "Why?" Paul looked at him. "Isn't this perfect? Our schools have trained so many literate people, and we've recruited so many officials through examinations. They need to be given something to do. Besides, I think those who are educated but can't find work matching their education are more dangerous than the relatives of traitors." Thomas couldn't find a reason to refute Paul, so he said, "I will revise the execution list according to your wishes." "I hope your choice is correct, Earl." "Paul," Marianne's voice rose slightly. "You know what? I came to say goodbye." "Oh? So you finally abandoned me again," Paul said jokingly. But Marianne frowned. "But now I've changed my mind. I need to stay by your side a little longer to observe whether you're fit to be a lord, for your safety, and for the sake of the Gleman family. Your father is gone, and I think I have a guardianship obligation to you. If necessary, I will use some special methods to correct you, and I swear I mean it." Her tone was stern, like a mother scolding her son, something Paul had never done even when he criticized her and the Mystic Order. Paul shook his head in annoyance, his gaze shifting between Marianne and Thomas. "You seem worried that I'm a pushover who doesn't know what's important. Honestly, I don't understand why you see me that way." "Well, I understand now, and it's my fault for not being clear." Paul summoned his chief secretary and ordered him to hang a map on the wall. "What's this?" Marianne and Thomas both looked surprised when they saw the map. Paul explained, "This is the vast area further north of the mountains. I'm only talking about a coastal area. From south to north, it's the Tranquil Plains, the Lucky Forest, and the Blackwater Basin." Paul pointed to the map, reading out the names of each place. "This land is even a third the size of the Kingdom of Alder. But it's an unfamiliar region, a virgin treasure." "Thomas, you mean?" "Yes," Paul exclaimed, slapping the map. "I will follow the ancient tradition of the border lords of the kingdom, expanding the Gleman family's territory into this vast area, developing it, managing it, making it as prosperous as the Northwest Bay. This is truly breathtaking," the chief judge commented. "Of course, this requires a large number of people, and our Northwest Bay, especially Arda, has a small population to begin with. So, executing so many people who aren't directly involved in the rebellion is a serious waste." "I understand what you mean," Thomas nodded. "You want to exile these people who should be executed there as labor." "My dear Thomas, you're right." Paul revealed a cruel smile, making himself look somewhat sinister. "Exiling those who live in civilized society to these barbaric lands is undoubtedly a rather cruel punishment, Although it's lighter than the death penalty, but the value they create can make up for the difference. The expression on Paul's face as he said this made him look like a ruthless lord who wanted to exploit prisoners to death, but the experienced Marianne saw through her son's deliberate display of cruelty at a glance and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. This vast land has immense potential. I've heard it's covered in black soil, so fertile you could practically squeeze oil out of it. It must be perfect for crops. I plan to first transform this place into an agricultural base, a major grain-producing region developed entirely on a large-scale farm model. At this point, Paul's cold expression vanished, replaced by enthusiasm. I'm certain that if fully developed, the grain produced here could more than feed the entire kingdom of Alder. He enthusiastically shared his plans with the two people opposite him. Further east of this area lies the Orcish Plains. If those arrogant barbarians dare to invade Alder, this region will become a bridgehead into the plains. We're located in the Northwest Bay. We don't need to painstakingly detour through the Naridan corridor. Our army can be transported here by ship, using the grain produced here as supplies for our expedition against the orcs on the plains. Paul's words greatly surprised Mariana. Was her son already planning a counterattack? But the Orcish attack hadn't even begun. However, just as she had this thought, Bernard entered the room again, looking flustered. Paul looked at him. You seem to be in a hurry. Yes, Lord Giles, something terrible has happened. Bernard handed Paul a piece of paper. Watcher's fortress has fallen, and the Orcish army has entered the northeastern part of the kingdom, and Princess Catherine's army is retreating westward. Chapter 673 Defense Preparations. That's serious. Paul took the telegram from Bernard with disbelief. After quickly glancing at it, his brow furrowed deeply. He immediately ordered, "Summon all senior officials to the Lord's mansion for a meeting." Thomas bowed to Paul. "Lord Giles, I won't disturb you any longer." The Chief Justice excused himself and left, leaving a somber atmosphere in the room. "It seems my earlier words have come true." Marianne broke the silence. Paul nodded. "Yes, they've arrived." Marianne's expression was very serious. "The steppe orcs, under the leadership of the new royal tent, have become stronger than ever before. If I remember correctly, Watcher's fortress has never been breached since its founding, but now it's in Orcish hands." "Paul, even so, are you still going to wade into these troubled waters?" Paul raised an eyebrow. "All my efforts so far have not been for the orcs." In the Lord's Mansion meeting room, the military and political officials of Lacaher town were gathered. "We have obtained Duke Ferdinand's consent to build a series of fortresses on the eastern border of the Duchy of Manda as a defensive line against the Orcish onslaught." Chief of Staff Schroeder pointed to a map hanging on the wall, explaining the army's preparations. Paul interrupted him. "Has the army studied the bastion plan I gave you?" Schroeder nodded. "Yes, Lord Gleman, we have studied your plan. But, just say what you have to say. It was just a suggestion after all. After careful study, we ultimately shelved your plan?" "Of course, only shelved it." Why?" Although he was somewhat prepared, the rejection of his genius idea still displeased Paul. Schroeder patiently explained, "Judging from the shape of the bastion, it should be designed to defend against enemies with firepower at the same level as ours. Enemies should at least be equipped with cannons or similar weapons. However, in reality, no other army in the world possesses cannons, including the orcs. Building a large number of bastions to defend against orcs would increase unnecessary construction costs. Therefore, we still prefer traditionally designed fortresses. There are many old castles along the border of Manda, which we can make good use of, repairing and improving them." You're right. Paul had to admit that Schroeder's words made sense. But he didn't want to give up completely. Considering the possibility of technology spillover, our future enemies may also be equipped with cannons. Therefore, I hope to build 1 or 2 bastions at transportation hubs first to accumulate construction experience and evaluate their effectiveness through exercises." Schroeder nodded. "The army will do as you command." The meeting's topic returned to the response to the orc invasion, and Sir Ford, the Grand Steward of the Council, made a suggestion. "Shouldn't we send an army to support the retreating royal knights?" This suggestion sparked heated discussion. Most people leaned towards supporting it. First, the Giles family had already formed a marriage alliance with the royal family, and Paul, as the princess's fiancé, couldn't remain indifferent. Second, according to traditional vassal obligations, as the most powerful lords of the Northwest Bay, the Giles family should support the royal army. After listening to everyone's opinions, Paul was also eager to try. The Arda army hadn't experienced a large-scale battle in a long time. In that case, let's send an army to Blackrock Plains to assist the royal army and the local lords in repelling the orcs. According to the telegram, Catherine planned to establish a defensive line at Blackrock Plains. He cursed under his breath, "Damn Duke Bradley, that guy's betrayal has greatly reduced the buffer zone." Paul looked at Schroeder. "How many troops do you think we should send?" Schroeder estimated, 4 full battalions, plus 4 transport companies formed from the reserves, and 2,000 civilian laborers. "Should we send half of the army? That already takes into account the ongoing expansion of the army, leaving half of the force." Paul thought for a moment and nodded in agreement with Schroeder's plan. The army expansion that Schroeder mentioned had begun after receiving news of the impending orc invasion. In fact, a comprehensive expansion plan had always existed within the army. It was the orc invasion that triggered it. Arda's army was still considered weak in terms of size, consisting of only 4 full battalions and 4 half battalions, plus an independent transport company and an independent artillery company. Although the new situation prompted Lacquerherd to immediately restore the 4 half battalions to full strength, this was still insufficient, so the plan to expand the army's size began in accordance with the times. During the previous military conference, a larger tactical unit, the regiment, was established as a new organizational structure. A regiment would consist of 3 battalions, with a regimental headquarters possessing its own artillery, transport, and communications companies. A regiment would have approximately 2,500 to 3,000 personnel. The initial goal was to establish 6 army regiments according to this standard, meaning the Arda army would reach nearly 20,000 men. To counter the Orcish invasion, economic work was also launched concurrently with military construction. Under Arda's leadership, the members of the customs union, through consultation, placed steel, fodder, saltpeter, and sulfur under control. Weapons and armor manufactured by the Northwest Industrial Company would be prioritized for supply to the armies of the Northwest Territories. The firearms factory located in District 51 underwent a large-scale expansion, and would continuously produce firearms, cannons, and gunpowder in the future. During the meeting, Schroeder solemnly requested Paul, "Lord Gleman, I hope you will agree to allow me to personally direct this certification process." Paul was shocked. "How can that be? You are the chief of staff of the army." In fact, although Schroeder was only the chief of staff, he also bore responsibilities similar to commander-in-chief of the army to some extent. As a lord, Paul did not have enough energy to actually lead the army's development. He could only offer suggestions on the general direction to ensure that the army's development would not deviate from what he believed to be the correct path. "Please forgive my willfulness, Lord Gleman. You should know that I was once one of the garrison commanders of Watcher's Fortress." The old knight's eyes blazed with desire and hatred. Paul nodded. "I agree. Schroeder, go and take your revenge." Chapter 674 Preparations before the expedition. The meeting at the Lord's Manor decided to dispatch troops to assist Princess Catherine in repelling the orc army. However, in practice, Paul discovered that his troops could not depart immediately. The Arda army had never been prepared for operations beyond the Northwest Bay. Its initial purpose was solely to protect the people and assets of the territory and to guard against hostile neighboring lords. After the War of the Usurpers, the army had established a deterrent and suppressive presence over the lords within the Northwest Bay, but no new demands had prompted changes to support its operations beyond its immediate vicinity. The Navy fared better, as they bore the crucial responsibility of maintaining the stability of the long sea route from the Northwest Bay to Horn Bay. Years of honing their skills had endowed the Arda Navy with a certain degree of long-range operational capability, enabling them to operate far from the Northwest Bay homeland. This long-range operational capability was not simply a matter of setting the fleet out to sea and relying on the officers and men's skilled navigation and combat abilities. It encompassed a wide range of aspects. For example, collecting hydrological and climatic data along the shipping route can facilitate the fleet's ability to estimate sailing time, select battlefields, and avoid extreme weather. Furthermore, maintaining friendly relations with major cities and ports along the route allows the fleet to easily repair itself, obtain supplies, treat the sick or wounded, or replenish its crew. In this regard, the Arda Navy even maintained a degree of goodwill with ports controlled by Grand Duke Giles of the Wolf Clan, after Giles reached a peace agreement with the royal family. Over the years, the Navy has diligently improved its capabilities in various aspects, enabling it to establish a foothold on the vast ocean, becoming a formidable force and continuing to expand its operational range step by step. However, unfortunately, the orcs come from the inland, and the navy cannot carry out the task of intercepting them, which must be left to the army. Compared to the navy, Arden's army is somewhat crippled. Thanks to the fact that the nations of this era had not yet universally established a true sense of sea power, the Arden navy could move freely on the oceans. But on land, the situation was quite different. The lands covered by civilization have been completely divided up by humankind, or rather, civilization was established precisely because humans developed a sense of territory. Besides natural elements like mountains and rivers, countless fortresses and passes have become formidable obstacles to passage. Arda's army cannot adapt to the terrain and customs of regions beyond the Northwest Bay like its navy. Troops can only be dispatched to provide support when needed. For example, Black Rock Plains is currently facing the threat of orcs. If the local lords are unable to defeat the orcs, they would naturally welcome a friendly force from elsewhere. However, sending troops when there is no external enemy is a sensitive matter. Another issue is supply. Arda's army can use the royal banner to demand various necessities from local lords, but Paul doubts their ability to supply an army far removed from this era. Similarly, in peacetime, establishing depots in other territories clearly intended for war is still a sensitive issue for local lords. They could tolerate, even welcome, Arda warships visiting their ports. After all, warships couldn't sail onto land, and the Arda naval officers and men had considerable spending power. But they would absolutely not welcome an Arda army unit visiting their territory. After the meeting of the heads of various departments in the Lord's Mansion, Paul went to the general staff and held a separate military meeting with the officers to discuss the details of troop deployment. How quickly can we deploy our troops? Paul asked Chief of Staff Schroeder with some concern. Schroeder's answer confirmed his concerns. Half a month, Lord Gleman, at least half a month, about 2 weeks. Paul was somewhat frustrated. Can't it be faster? The answer left him feeling deflated. Half a month? This speed was far from the rapid reaction force he had always wanted to build. Besides, wouldn't this make the royal family, or rather Catherine, think he was deliberately delaying? Schroeder replied helplessly, although we are going to fight in friendly territory, as you know, the cargo we are carrying, cannons, shells, gunpowder, etc., is extremely heavy. Roads that others can travel, we may not be able to traverse. We need to send scouts to explore and select routes. We also need to prepare enough wagons to transport the cargo, as well as a corresponding number of draft animals. We also need to consider the feed for these animals and their own consumption. A disease outbreak could render them all unusable. 2 weeks is already a rather daring plan, because the cargo I mentioned only includes weapons and ammunition. Our army's advantage largely depends on this, and it cannot be obtained in other territories, so we must prioritize ensuring the quantity of ammunition. As for the soldiers' rations, we can only immediately procure 1 month's worth. If the war continues, hopefully the local economy and crop yields will be sufficient to support the fighting for another month. May God bless us. That sounds quite reasonable. Paul was still frowning. Schroeder seemed to sense Paul's concerns and reassured him, Her Highness will understand. In fact, compared to other territories, we can send over 2,000 men within 2 weeks, along with a month's worth of supplies. That's quite fast. All right, my dear Schroeder, let's proceed according to your schedule. Paul nodded. Just let me know if you need anything. Never fight an unprepared battle. This was a military principle he upheld. He absolutely could not send his soldiers to their deaths just to potentially lose face in front of his fiancée. The old knight solemnly said, I will speak up, Lord Gleman. Paul said, I have made a new decision. After you depart, I will immediately prepare another expeditionary force and personally lead it to support you. Of course, with even more thorough preparation, I will establish a strong and efficient supply line between where you and your troops are located and Alda, to supply you with all kinds of materials needed for the war. The old knight's face flushed. Thank you, Lord Gleman. You will become a hero in the history of the Order. Paul smiled calmly, all for the sake of keeping the enemy outside the borders. Promise me, Schroeder, that the orcs will never be allowed into the Northwest Bay. I will do everything in my power. Schroeder raised his voice. Chapter 675 Ambush of the Orcs. Deep in the dense forest, sunlight filtered through the thick foliage, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Lester remained motionless, hidden in the bushes, occasionally glancing at the road in the distance. The road was flat and straight, winding through the forest towards the distant east. He wasn't alone. Over 50 other men lay in ambush on either side of the road. Each was a skilled warrior, proficient in various combat techniques, elite soldiers of the Royal Knights. The surroundings were quiet, broken only by the occasional bird call. Time slowly passed, an hour, 2 hours. Suddenly, a soft pattering sound came from afar, growing clearer. Someone was riding a horse at full gallop. Lester gripped his crossbow arm tightly, his palms sweating, his heart pounding. A flock of birds took flight, and in his line of sight, 2 knights suddenly emerged from around a bend in the road. The bait had returned. The riders frantically shook the reins, panting heavily. Clearly, someone was chasing them. One of them had an arrow lodged in his shoulder, blood staining the surrounding area, a gruesome sight. The other man freed one hand, making various hand gestures in midair. 30, cavalry, light armor, Lester muttered to himself, deciphering their message. His tension lessened considerably. He had the advantage in numbers. The 2 knights didn't linger, riding westward along the path, their figures quickly disappearing into the dense forest. About 10 minutes later, a much more rapid sound of hooves approached. Orcs were coming. Robust bodies, protruding canines, covered in fine fur, and with menacing green eyes. They were often perceived as cruel and terrifying. And this group was chasing the 2 human knights. The squad leader led the way, galloping ahead of his companions until the 2 humans disappeared into the dense forest. The reins suddenly tightened, forcing the warhorse to rear up and stop with a disgruntled neigh. "Urag, why did you stop? Haven't you heard the human saying, never enter a forest lightly?" "Ha ha ha," one of his subordinates, dissatisfied with his caution, said. "Are you going to let 2 tongues escape because of your cowardice?" Urag snorted. "We are the pride of the grasslands, but we must still have reverence for the unfamiliar forest," the subordinate retorted. "Powerful orcs fear no terrain." "Admit it, Urag, you're cowardly." Crack, the whip lashed hard across the face of the one who had spoken so rudely. "You?" The struck orc's eyes blazed with resentment. Urag raised his whip. "Don't forget I won the warriors contest and became your commander. If you're so capable, beat me in the next contest before you come and teach me a lesson." The orc dared not argue. But Urag immediately commanded, "I've changed my mind. Continue the pursuit." "Go." With that, he whipped the horse, and it reared up and charged into the depths of the forest. The orcs urged their mounts on, quickly catching up with their leader. They galloped hundreds of meters through the forest, surrounded by trees, obscuring the view beyond. "We should spread out, not huddle together on this narrow path." Just as this thought crossed Urag's mind, a black, rope-like object suddenly sprang up from the flat road ahead. Oh no! His warhorse, unable to react in time, tripped on the rope. It neighed in terror, its massive body tilting uncontrollably to the side. Urag, unable to control his mount, was thrown to the ground by the force of the horse's thrust. At the same time, a series of whooshing sounds rang out. Whoosh! 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 A sharp pain shot through his arm. Something had torn through his flesh and embedded itself deeply. "Ah!" The orc, still rolling on the ground, cried out. An ambush. Black arrows rained down from the roadside trees, striking the orcs and their horses repeatedly, their screams echoing through the forest clang. The orcs, of course, wouldn't sit idly by. They drew their weapons and raised their light shields to deflect the arrows. Being in the forest, the orcs had dismounted to fight on foot, using their mounts for cover. As the rain of arrows subsided, countless figures burst from the dense forest on both sides, charging towards the orc cavalry. Despicable humans, realizing they had fallen into a trap, the orcs showed no fear, roaring as they charged forward. A fierce battle ensued, the shouts of battle echoing through the forest. As the leader of this orc squad, Urag sensed danger. In his haste, he could only perceive that the enemy outnumbered his own. He leaped to his feet, gritting his teeth as he pulled the arrow from his arm. The barbed flesh was torn open, causing him to wince in pain. Danger was imminent. Clang. The clash of metal weapons sparked in mid-air as the orc, wielding a sword in his left hand, blocked a fatal blow. Urag turned his head, his eyes, almost spitting fire, meeting the pupils of a young human. Lester braced himself against the immense force emanating from his sword hilt, inwardly shocked. Like the towering orc before him, many of his men were already wounded by arrows, yet they still possessed the strength to fight. Lester sensed a tangible aura erupting from the orc's roar. Coupled with his ferocious face and imposing physique, An ordinary human soldier would have long since shattered their defenses with fear. But Lester was a knight trained in martial arts since childhood, and one of the best among his peers. He calmly and collectedly wielded his longsword, deflecting the orcs' furious attacks time and again. This human was so formidable. Since entering human territory, Urg had become accustomed to the fearful expressions of these weak older aliens upon seeing him. Faced with this dare to ambush him, his anger intensified, and he began to lose his composure. He watched as the human opposite him revealed his side as he dodged. He mustered his strength and swung his greatsword at his opponent. But the scene he imagined, cutting his opponent in two, did not occur. Instead, the human nimbly turned and plunged his longsword into his own ribs. Feeling the excruciating pain in his upper body, Urg closed his eyes unwillingly. His massive body collapsed to the ground. Lester, panting heavily, looked around. The melee was nearing its end. His side had ultimately won due to their numerical advantage. When the last orc was killed, the human side had also suffered over a dozen casualties. Sorry, I worked late last night and didn't finish writing before bed. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.